Ooh, lovely. That's a lovely. Let's see what we got going on. Going live? Yes, we are going live. Okay. Welcome everybody to Hash Church, Season 11, Episode 20, the special Robert Connell Clarke question and answer episode. I'm not going to lie, I'm super excited for this episode, so we're going to get into it here really soon. Let me get some things open here so I can do our shout out our sponsors, our wonderful, wonderful sponsors. We're going to start off with the Press Club. So big shout out to the Press Club, trusted by top hash makers from around the world since 2016. The Press Club is your one-stop shop for award-winning solventless gear. From press bags to wash bags to presses to vessels, you'll find everything you need from wash to press. We're big fans of the Press Club and what they're doing in the community. So we're excited to have them on board as an official sponsor for Hash Church. Made in the USA, patented pink stitch, zero blowout guarantee. Small family-owned business, free expedited shipping over $75, and international shipping also available. You can visit them at the Press Club and use the code HashChurch, all capital letters, to take 10% off your purchase. So big shout out to those guys. And shout out to Puffco. Big thanks to Puffco. These guys are massive supporters of Hash Church. Thank you for sponsoring Hash Church. Puffco, as everyone knows, has absolutely revolutionized cannabis culture, normalized extracts with their incredible portable devices like the Puffco Peak Pro, the Pivot, and the Proxy. These amazing units deliver top-tier performance and style, making them favorites in our community. Puffco's unwavering support for all things cannabis keep us lit and united. Check them out. Puffco's got your back. www.puffco.com and at Puffco on Instagram. Hey, it wouldn't be a Hash Church without shouting out Bubble Bags. We stand out as the premier choice for water hash extraction bags, and it's no surprise why. We're the original innovators who set the standard for quality and performance. Crafted with durability in mind, these bags come with a lifetime warranty, ensuring you're covered for years of consistent use. The team behind Bubble Bags, that's me, takes pride in their pioneering legacy, backing every product with unwavering confidence and a commitment to excellence, making us the trusted go-to for enthusiasts and professionals alike seeking top-tier hash extraction results. www.bubblebag.com. And if you use the code HashChurch10, you will get yourself a 10% discount on that. So shout out to all of those fellows. I'd also like to give a small little introduction to our special guest today. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished guest, who I've known and been friends for about 30 years, Robert Connell Clarke. Renowned author, botanist, intrepid traveler whose pioneering work has left an indelible mark on the world of cannabis research. With a passion for exploring the intricate relationships between plants, people, and culture, Robert has traversed the globe, delving into the science, history, and traditions surrounding cannabis. His groundbreaking books, including Marijuana Botany and Cannabis, Evolution, and Ethnobotany, have become essential resources for enthusiasts, scholars, and professionals alike, blending rigorous botanical insights with a deep appreciation for the plant's cultural significance. I would also love to mention his book, Hashish, which was an absolute game changer for me and many hash makers the world around. So join us in welcoming this extraordinary visionary whose lifelong dedication to understanding cannabis has enlightened and inspired countless minds. Wonderful. Welcome, Rob Clarke. Welcome, Mojave Richmond. Welcome, Ryan Lee, aka Chimera. And soon we'll welcome Fletch as well. Welcome, Rob. Nice to have you on Hash Church this morning, afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Really good to have you, man. It's been too long. You're in and around Amsterdam, enjoying life.
Absolute, super nice here. When the
Awesome.
Dutch are not known for great weather, but when it's nice, it's super nice. So,
yeah,
welcome.
Exactly. Here. Vancouver's similar. We get a lot of the Dutch weather. We get a lot of the rain. So when the sun cracks out, we're kind of like more appreciative than, say Mojave down in California, who sees it 363 days a year.
70 degrees and sunny. Exciting.
Every day. Wonderful. Well, we're just waiting for Fletch to pop in. We're going to get this party started. We got a bunch of folks in the chat right now. We got about just under 200 people watching live. I'm sure we'll get that up to 300 or 400 as people share out the link. And really excited. We're going to go over the whole story and history of all the incredible work that Rob has done over the course of the last, geez, Rob, how many years has it been?
Oh, gee whiz. Moved to Amsterdam almost 40 years ago.
Really good to have.
Yeah.
40
Yeah.
years ago. That is incredible. Well, I know we were talking earlier, and we're going to start sort of with the beginning of the whole sort of scenario. And maybe, Fletch, you wanted to open it up. You had a good question in regards to where things started. Fletch has got a look on his face like he's doing technical difficulties.
Yeah, I got it now, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think where we were going to start, Rob, is just kind of where you kind of got your start, how you ended up in cannabis, and what really got you on the path to writing your first piece and making your way into Amsterdam.
Tell us about your first joint or cannabis experience too.
Yeah. It all started for me going to university. And I was a science student in high school, but I never smoked. And I just ended up magically at the University of California in Santa Cruz, which of their 11 campuses is by far and away the most experimental and liberal and non-judgmental. So I had a great time there, and I learned about the herb. I learned about it's the first place I ever saw hashish, and started meeting people who actually were directly involved. The first hashish I smoked with the guy who brought it from Pakistan. You know, as a student. It was pretty simple back in those days. It wasn't. It's pretty easy to figure it all out at the start. And I needed to graduate. You could graduate by writing a dissertation, so I wrote the Botany and Ecology of Cannabis, which I then self-published a year later. Came out in '77, so it's been a while. But that's what got me started. It's the educational system. It was the science of it all.
And what materials was there prior to you writing your dissertation? You know, was there very much material to look at even, or were you really, looking at plants and coming up with this all from scratch?
No, it's a library dissertation. It's much like my work today. It's based on what other people have done and trying to put it together in a form that people can understand. And that's the struggle, really. But there was a lot of stuff then. It was mostly with hemp. It was early 70s United Nations sponsored work. The Bulletin on Narcotic Drugs. There was all kinds of stuff out there. You just had to get it through the library system. The only book that was there I discovered right off the bat, and that was Mark Merlin's Man and Marijuana. And that was about the ethnobotanical relationship between humans and the cannabis plant. And I believe his little booklet, little hardcover, cute little book, great collector's item. It came out in '76, if I remember right, or maybe a year or two earlier even. There you go. And
it's probably one year.
It really it showed me as another student, 73, there you go. That's a Perpetus edition. So it actually came out a bit earlier, in 72. There you go. But in University of Chicago Press, this is like our later work together, Cannabis Evolution and Ethnobotany. This is published by a major press. Our book was University of California Press. University of Chicago is one of the top 5 in America, still is. So you can see from that, as an undergraduate trying to graduate, that was a master's dissertation Mark did at University of California, Santa Barbara. So I had a model. It was like, well, hell, if he could do it. And they looked at me, even my sponsors there, you had sponsors, kind of like grad school. And they looked at me like, really? And I just held that up for the library and went, it's been done, but I'm going to do the botany. He did the ethno more than the botany. And they went, okay. And that's how it went. And then Mark and I later wrote a book together. It's been golden. It's been a great opportunity, but he's the one that got me started. Just go to the library. It's virtual now, but everybody, lesson number 1, go to the library. Look stuff up on the internet. It's all there. It's real easy. It's better than ever. There's more to look at than ever. Just go for it. I do it every day. It's addictive, but it's fun.
I've never seen that book before. So
Yeah.
thank you. I'm learning already. That is so cool. 28 years old he was when he wrote that book. And you're right, he earned his bachelor degree at the history from the University of California in Santa Barbara, and his master's degree he did in geography from the University of Hawaii. Cool.
And his doctoral degree he did at the University of Hawaii, where he's still a professor. He retires after 51 years and like 3 months
Wow.
when summer vacation starts. And he wrote On the Trail of the Ancient Opium Poppy. So for his doctoral degree, he went to the opium poppy history. And it's a hardcover book that I have a copy ex libris from somewhere, but that's a hard one to find. But that's a great read too, just about the same approach to another plant, a drug plant, of course.
So Rob, you have this inherently curious mind, but I'm curious if you could back it up a little bit and just like talk about, so you come to university and you discover cannabis, you have this, immersive experience. At what point did you start to see that there was this vacuum of information and that it would be a path for you as an educator and as someone who's, as a scientist to begin writing? Because I know it's early 70s, it's prohibition is raging. And what was that spark of just did you start looking for information and just not find it and were not happy with that? And
no, I knew from the information I'd found what a struggle it was to find it. So that made sense to make that information available. I self-published that first book. I sold 500 that I got printed at the local printer guy in Santa Cruz who let me go in late at night and cut and bind my own copies and stuff. It was pretty folksy. And I printed and sold 500 and they sold pretty quick. I took them around to bookshops in California and met growers because I'd written the book. That was what that started my meeting growers around California. People were so trusting. They'd order my book and send me a personal check with their home address and phone number. Okay, so I had lots of these checks in Oregon too. And I went, well, you ordered my book, I'll be in the neighborhood. I'd kind of like to meet you. And more often than not, I got herb, I got dinner, I got a place to stay. I made friends. I still have some of those friends. And it was just such a transparent world. Now it's
authenticity, Rob. It was authenticity. And I can tell you we have that in common because when I started doing the bubble bags, people were kind of like, who is this guy? And then suddenly it was this trust that was passed on where you get invited into people's grows, into their homes. They're sending you their home addresses. All of a sudden, it's kind of a responsibility you have as the years go by. You're like, holy smokes. Like,
yeah.
I don't know if there's a grow you wouldn't be invited into, Rob.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, at this point, but back then it was just because everybody pretty much trusted everybody else. It was such a common denominator that you were all doing something that, it was illegal, but it wasn't the 80s yet. Okay. It hadn't gone, the drug war hadn't begun yet. So it was illegal. Helicopters, they messed with people, but it wasn't such a dire consequence and such a bad thing,
I think it's also important to note how much certain people value knowledge and information being passed along, and that develops a lot of trust between people because essentially, in my opinion, the most valuable thing that you can pass on and share with people is knowledge, information, and experience.
Was that ended up meeting David with ecology? He ordered
he ordered it and I delivered it to the door, and I didn't meet David, but I met Diana. She was actually pregnant with Maya.
Wow.
So that takes us back a long way, but almost 50 years.
76, 77.
45 years or something.
She just mentioned in chat that she was pregnant with Maya in 77 when you wrote that book and you guys met.
Yeah. I met David later. We met out at a park somewhere. Yeah, began our relationship. But He was, even in those days, he wasn't a guy who went around and introduced himself to everybody.
Yeah, how did you meet David?
Well, writing a book. I mean, that's what it took. It wouldn't have been just hanging out at the beach smoking joints. So yeah,
No.
it took something. So
And
that's
then
where.
you kind of expanded upon ecology and botany, and that became marijuana botany.
Yeah, publisher Ron or at that day and age, and/or Press in Berkeley. Um, a friend of mine, friend of a friend, was in the owner's office. They'd already published Ed and Mel's book, the first growers guide they did, and so I knew who they were, but I hadn't really approached him. But a friend of mine, he had a copy on his desk, and a friend of mine saw it and went, "Hey, you should ask this guy to write a book. Have you looked at that?" And he kind of hadn't, and he looked at it, and it was a little trigger like that again. And they contacted me, and actually in those days you got an advance, and I got a little advance, and I started expanding on what I already had and drawing a lot more pictures too, but expanding the knowledge back to the library, and that's how marijuana botany came about. So yeah,
That was 1981.
yes, that would have been the copyright on that one. So it was 4 years later.
Rob,
Yeah.
could you kind of describe, what the smoking experience was like in the 1970s as you were first introduced to it?
Hmm.
Like the
Yeah.
scene, varieties available, was it import only? Maybe memorable strains from the 70s you never saw again, or not even strains, but hybrids, maybe anything like that?
Till the late 70s and onward, but there really wasn't any homegrown that wasn't just sort of leaves and stems. I mean, the mid 70s onward, that all changed. Sinsemilla came to town and people started figuring out what they were doing. But even the growers' guides before that time didn't really tell you what to do right. So the books, Sinsemilla flowers, whatever it is, from Big Sur, that was a book that really changed it. It had pictures of what it was supposed to look like in a garden, and that was pictures are worth 1,000 words. People finally got it. But the Sinsemilla thing changed it all. The early varieties, there was no Afghan, so it was all Colombian, Mexican, Jamaican, a little later Thai thrown in. I mean, Hayes had Indian in it. There's South Indian at the end, and yeah, there it is. Sinsemilla marijuana flowers. Yep.
I think
Cinnamon.
I think something people would maybe later in the conversation, people would be interested to hear what you remember of those varieties when they were import still, smell and flavor and stuff like that. But we can get into that later.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I'll
but
say off the bat though, smell and flavor is very subjective and hard to describe, but yeah, we can try.
what about the plants that became those beautiful pictures that you put in marijuana botany? Where did you see those growing in the pure lines? And I mean, you were given full descriptions of all these different land races.
Yeah. Most of those things were Colombian or Mexican, almost entirely. There's occasionally something from Panama or something from Thailand, or David had things from India, and more exotic places. But yeah, mostly everything was, I mean, that we were swamped with Mexican and Colombian. So that's what everybody stuck out. And most of it wasn't anything anybody even in those days was particularly interested in. But some plants performed wherever they were growing. And of course, the farther south you lived in America, the better you did. I mean, none of those things would go off at, you know, Oregon even was kind of tough for most things. So, and we got some other exotics. The Malawi from African Malawi came in those late years. There was smatterings of interesting stuff, and some, weighed in some of it. People were curious beasts, man. Everything that came along, people planted the seeds, and when it was something that was different from Colombian and Mexican, they got bumped up. More interest.
What?
By the like late 70s, early 80s. So it sounds like maybe early 80s you met David.
No, mid 77.
Okay. So, at what point did you start seeing like his work and some of his breedings and early stuff?
Right after that, he already had a place with family in, ironically enough, Watsonville. And yeah, I started visiting him there and seeing things. Very small greenhouse, but different things. Skunk number one was in there, Hayes, Offspring, Afghani one was in that little house. I mean, a lot of the seminal stuff that tiny little greenhouse, but a lot of the seminal stuff that he very soon after took to Amsterdam and started things there.
When
So
you
nobody
saw
can-
that,
nobody
what
get
was
the
your
hands
thoughts? Sorry,
The
Ryan. Go
problem
ahead.
was the diversity, of course. It was different kinds of things, similar things. I mean, I'd seen things like this hybrid before. It was a particularly nice one, but I'd never seen South Indian. I'd never seen, you know, some I'd seen Afghan, but not that Afghan. And yeah, it was exotic. It's diversity. We got really used to it almost after for a bit, and now we think diversity is something that smells like bananas instead of strawberries. But this is not really diversity. I mean, the diversity we experienced, every plant you saw and went, well, that's different from whatever plant it was that you just looked at. The next one was markedly different.
Right.
You know, even if they were brothers and sisters and or both sisters, it's yeah, very interesting. It was
So
a great time.
that whole journey started in Pinto Lake. That's where you met Dave for the first time.
Yeah, it's the name of the little park there. Yeah.
Wow.
And,
I got Diana in the chat room, and she has an incredible memory.
yeah.
There's some real historical. That's where we should put the bench. Anyway, yeah, that's very cool.
I got a quick question,
How
Rob. Before we move on, Ryan, I think something people, just because Rob mentioned it, would be interested in is, do you remember exactly what haze was, or what its early renditions were, and when it kind of went into the world?
uh yeah, I mean, it was a serial hybrid. It was half of whatever was new every year. Not unusual for growers even today to do the same thing. You got something good, you cross it with something new. Okay. The new is usually a male, so almost always a male that pollinated females, all of them, sometimes in this case. And every year was something added. It started with Mexican and Colombian, like everything else, but Thai was added, South Indian was added at some point. So, but it was maybe a 5-year run max. I mean, just for the haze development. 76, the Independence year, was the year the poster came out, and it had been around for a couple of years before that, I'd say. And yeah, I knew one of the guys through a different way, and David knew both of them. So yeah, that's history. Bob and Jerry.
And there is no wide leaf drug cultivar that was inbred during those times. It's strictly narrow leaf.
It was a narrow leaf, strictly narrow leaf. And yeah, all those ingredients, all those things brought in were narrow leaf. I don't
Right.
think, I mean, this was running out in 78 or something. You know, it wasn't going on much after that. And people grew other things as they came online, but it's one thing. But yeah, things that are more commercially viable. All the hazes matured really late. All those were grown in greenhouses all the way through from the beginning. They couldn't really do them outside, not even in Santa Cruz. So yeah, it was they were challenging. But that started to run out. And that after that, yeah, to move to ended up moving to Holland, like a lot of things. So
how did you? What's the story behind you falling in with Mahlberg and going over to Bloomington, Indiana, and ended up at school there?
well, I wanted to get back to school. I wanted to go study. So that was the only lab where 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 they had a license, where they're actually doing research that was interesting. There were only 3 or 4 licenses then. Mississippi had one, and my mother's alma mater. I almost went to Mississippi. My mom graduated from there, but didn't do that. It was a little too governmental. And Mahlberg was doing much more interesting stuff and growing a variety of things. And yeah, I had a little greenhouse on the roof of the building. It was all kind of quaint. So I went there and studied, and I never graduated.
You just reached out to Mahlberg and applied.
Yeah. Yeah. And I went and took the SAT tests and did all that stuff, whatever the advanced version of it, whatever it was. Go back to graduate school version and did the tests and studied before I took them and blah, 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 and went back to school. And it was cool. I enjoyed it. It was, I got sidetracked. I went and joined the circus. I went and joined the Hortapharm circus. That's what it turned into. But yeah, I actually never finished all that material I developed. I learned about ethnobotany then, really. I did what Mark had done in a lot of ways. And my minor was anthropology. So I started attending Society for Economic Botany meetings. Now the Society for Ethnobotany, it's called. Recently changed their name. Great group. You know, you meet people who study all kinds of plants in all kinds of weird places and the relations with humans. And it was just wonderful. It's a field I would recommend to anybody who's diverse and curious. But yeah, fantastic stuff. So that was why I went there. Mahlberg had the ticket for being able to grow plants and work with them.
So you mentioned a greenhouse on the roof there?
Yeah, they had a greenhouse on the roof of the 4-story building. And fraternity pranks had tried to break in a couple of times and had painted a little graffiti on it over the years, but it was really secure. I mean, how they even got up there and did that, I have no idea. And it was pretty small, but it was cool. I had a funny little meeting. When I first got there, it was like the second week there as a grad student. There was somebody there to see me, and it was the two guys who ran the greenhouses on the roof that had other stuff in them, and the greenhouses in front of the building. They had other small greenhouses and public ones. And they came to me and said, you're going to study cannabis here in Mahlbergs Lab? And I said, yeah, that's my plan. And they both looked really relieved. They went, oh, great. We don't have to work with those damn opium poppies. Those things are so hard to grow. They got these little tiny seeds and they're really finicky and they have to have sandy soil. And I said, no. I'm not going to do opium poppies. Other people in the lab had, but obviously these guys were really happy when I was going to grow cannabis. It's like, oh, that stuff grows like great. It's super easy. You stick the seeds in, it grows, you water it, fine. So they were relieved. They were really happy I was not going to study the other model. But
so you were there until 84-ish.
Bad with dates, but no, later than that. 86, I would say.
Okay.
I went to Amsterdam in 87. So
okay, so
yeah,
David had been over here for a few years by the time you came over.
Yeah, no, that was I moved over about an hour after a year after David was there. So maybe, yeah, a little less than a year, but something like that. So
how different did you kind of see cannabis change from, let's say, 1979 to like 1988 when you moved to Amsterdam? Was there a giant shift in America and in Amsterdam in terms of available seed varieties and things of that nature? What maybe stood out to you during that time?
well, when I got to Amsterdam, there weren't any. There were some interesting seed things available, but they weren't really Sinsemilla varieties. They were crosses between land races, and we could talk about that in a minute. SSSC, you mentioned this Super Sativa Seed Club, those kind of things. But what happened in the 80s was a drug war. I mean, it helped drive me out of America. I mean, you could stay there and keep getting in trouble, but what was the point? I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. It was getting harder and harder. And people were moving indoors. There was the big shift to move indoors to avoid the getting caught up in the drug war. And outdoor growing people were started trying to make a bunch of money if they were going to take the chance. The big timers, we called them in California, they'd move in and buy a place and try to grow a bunch of weed or rent a place or whatever. And outdoors, usually we had a favorable climate, but indoors as well. And yeah, it was the decade where everything changed. It was a good time to leave. I mean, I felt right about. I'd been there through most of it, and it just didn't seem like it was going a very good direction. And you going to school is the only way to be able to do anything there without running into some kind of trouble. And the Netherlands wasn't like that. There was at least a possibility to do things. And while you're exercising that possibility, you likely weren't going to get in a bunch of trouble. So it was a logical situation, really. So that's what brought me here.
So you transitioned over, and were you working with David at the beginning, right from the
Yeah,
beginning?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
The Hortapharm, and what about, can you tell us about how Hortapharm kind of developed and the International Hemp Association work that you did and all that kind of
Right,
stuff?
exactly. Well, David started Hortapharm after I'd been there for a little while, but um, that was originally to make dry sieved hash and use it as a potent raw material supply for THC to make a generic equivalent to Marinol.
Right.
Well, that was the initial thrust of Hortapharm. And that led eventually to working with GW and other things, but that was the original thrust. And David set up to do that and got the permissions to grow, got the licenses from the government, which incidentally was not conspiratorial. He's just the first person to ask. Okay. Anybody with persistence could have asked. There were no special favors granted for any of you remaining conspiracy freaks. But no, it's just he had the gumption to ask first, And the Dutch went, well, nothing really wrong with that. Well, let's figure out how we can do this. And we did. We had a license for years, but it was just simply because of that. But we could do research and we had to destroy the material, but we could do pretty much whatever we wanted. So that was a really good run. There was a lot of basic research got done, very basic things that people have gone on and used in businesses, but mostly just continued on with research on the same subjects. Single
Right,
cannabis breeding, making selfs with STS. I mean, the list goes on and on. But
polyploids and tissue culture.
tissue culture, yeah, yeah.
What about the AIHA? When did that come about, and what was kind of the genesis of that?
Pretty early in the Hortifarm history. What's our first issue? I think it's 93 maybe, but it's that was David's idea. And it was essentially looking at the cannabis plant, not from the medical side, but looking at all the rest of it. Because David had always been interested in the whole plant, me too. But and we had the ties with Wageningen at that point. We had Hayo Vanderwerf, ATN was coming over to us soon. So we had there you go. We had there it is, 94. A lot of other interests in hemp. So that's where it started. There was no there was no information source for hemp. I mean, there was The Emperor Wears No Clothes and a few other things, and nothing wrong with them, but it was historical angle on things. It wasn't so much a science angle, not an empirical angle so much. So this was really good. And we started going to meetings and meeting people through the Vavilov system and, researchers that didn't have Ukraine and places that didn't have any outlet for their research. Really. They published in journals that nobody ever read. So they wanted to be published in English. So that was part of it. Ivan Bocha and a lot of people who were really instrumental, especially hemp breeders. That was our main interest. But yeah, fantastic stuff.
Here's a shot of Goroborodko from Kiev with Sasha the farmer. I'm on the far left there. That's my hemp store in 1992,
Okay.
I believe, the Hemp Exchange 93. IHA was a huge inspiration to us. We would have never gotten hemp growing in Manitoba without the professionalism of those documents, So thank you, Rob.
I should say here too, I mean, like with your books, the International Hemp Association placed you and David, the way I've described it, as kind of the center of the hub of the cannabis world, at least in terms of information. I mean, you had people, like you said, all these hemp farmers and academics that wanted to learn about cannabis, and Marcus's group and others in Canada and other countries. David would get many kilos of seeds of 10 or 15 different varieties and have them on hand so that they could be shared when, anybody from any given country called up the IHA. So you guys became that central hub of information, and I think that really put you and David in the kind of the center of the cannabis world.
Yeah, and the the team we had too. I mean, not long after that, ATN, or right around the same time, published his doctoral dissertation. What was it called? Cannabis diversity or something.
Yeah,
and he talked about the heritage of all the different hemp varieties and listed where you could get them in their contacts. So that was like right there and now in a peer-reviewed article out in the real world, on top of what we'd explained about things in the journal and interviewed people. So it all tied together. It was a real teamwork thing. Real and the Wageningen crew were great. There was that 3 or 4 year project where they're really looking at hemp as a source of paper pulp for the biomass for paper pulp. But they did a lot of really basic, fundamental agronomic research and with trialing different varieties with cannabis. And it's here in Holland. They were growing drug varieties, but they weren't tested all the time. And I mean, they had some leeway. They could try some different things and see how they worked. And it was cool. They had varieties that were quite late flowering and couldn't make seeds here, but you could make pulp. And they did all this work. And the graduates from that, I mean, Etienne was one, but Sebastian Hedink was another one who did really good work there. And Heil Vanderwerf went on to France to work there. He's just retiring now. I mean, my God, this has been a legacy of people. And they were all involved from that major project. So the Dutch side has been really important in advancing cannabis on all levels.
Well, it was part of kind of like almost a refugia during Prohibition in a way.
Yeah, it was. It was. A lot of people came here and a lot of people have moved on, but yeah, it was like refugia. It was, it wasn't permanent. People came and used it as a stepping stone, a lily pad, whatever, and moved on. The whole focus on seed companies in Holland moved on a long time ago. It moved to Spain. Now it's moved even beyond. But yeah, that whole world changed.
Yeah, well, not only for the people, but the diversity of the plant as well, right? Holland kind of became a central hub, and the Americans were bringing their stuff over, and so many other folks from all over the world, and the coffee shops. I mean,
oh yeah,
Durban Poison came from Ed Rosenthal finding that at a coffee shop called Transcade, wasn't it?
Yeah, right. But he found that even before we left America. And there was the early finds. But yeah, and South Africa's come from other sides too, I'm sure. But yeah, that was a really important key in the whole picture. I was just discussing this with Simon earlier today. It was another source of terpenoline that wasn't haze. And
Right.
it came in a package that people bred with a lot, because South Africa, the Durban poison was early. It was the earliest narrow leaf drug variety there was. I mean, there wasn't anything else around that came off any earlier. So it was really important, really important. It was until Afghan earliness came along, and it was earlier than a lot of those. It was really important. And that was another way that terpenoline snuck in there.
So what was the top dominant terpene profile in the Indian cannabis varieties then that were brought in? Was that
They would have had some terpenoline in them possibly too, but don't really know. I mean, most of them, like most of those landracey things, were more on the spicy
myrcene and
side,
beta carotene?
the terephthalate side and things, especially if they had any time in transit. But even homegrown ones, that was still strong in them. But yeah, and other lighter terpenes at the time, I had no idea what any of them were, but I still struggle to get my nose around them. But yeah, they were definitely not the kind of aromas you got from Afghan when it showed up. That's for sure. Afghan was much resinier also, but it just had different aromas. It was much more the earthy dankness world instead of the flowery, fruity world. Of course, the hybrids between the two, I mean, they've gone off the chart. Now it's the everything world.
Yeah. And if something's dominant in anything, that's what it is. So all CBD flower is just CBDs. That's the CBDs. If it's a narrow leaf drug cultivar, oh, that's terpenoline. It's like, but have you smelled it just by itself? It's always a profile that we're always smelling, but we all kind of tend to say things like, "Oh, that's the smell of terpenoline." It's like, well, plus whatever other aromatic
It might be
volatiles
the
are present.
dominant one in those cultivars, which it is, but it ain't everything. It doesn't
Right.
have that dominating and strong an aroma on its own, really.
Mm.
And it's kind of I think a perfumer would call it something you'd blend with other stuff. It doesn't, if you just open the jar and smell it, it doesn't particularly stand on its own.
Interesting.
But it's certainly has interesting effects. My God.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's kind of really put you and David at the center of the international cannabis scene to a certain degree was, like Ryan had said, Amsterdam became like the refuge where if you got too big for wherever you were from, Amsterdam was kind of a place for you to go be weed if you wanted to. And and that brought in a lot of quality people. I feel like and it's kind of like a graduate school at universities. You kind of end up with people from all over that are all there for the same reason.
Mm.
And I think that your guys' involvement not only in the professional side of it or like the IHA, but also supplying the genetic material for what became a lot of the world's first, let's call it improved varieties that are good for indoor production and scaled production. And maybe could you kind of go into maybe mid late 80s as indoor growing started to kind of to come off? when did uh when did you really start seeing the quality of herb change and some of the strains, obviously Skunk One and Haze being in Northern Lights being super influential? What varieties stood out to you, and where did you really see the quality change at that time?
Oh, a lot of varieties stood out to me, but I was more into the earlier things still. I mean, I've never been a big Afghan fan. I'm a big hashish fan, and we'll get around to hashish here in a few minutes too. But I mean, it's without Afghan, we wouldn't really have hashish as we know it today. But as a herb smoker back in the day, I really appreciated the non-Afghan varieties, pretty much the hybrids made from all the rest of the stuff. So that was all good. The big shift. I mean, everything that was being grown was still being selected and bred for growing outdoors. I mean, people didn't really start making selections indoors until they made clones. I mean, I could ask Ryan what he thinks, but there hasn't been a tremendous amount of breeding for indoors. It was selection. It was things either survived and performed indoors and were short enough, yielded enough, and did it fast enough that they survived the selection mill. But they were really intended to be grown outdoors. And you can take a lot of things from indoors and put them outdoors and they make some pretty awesome flour. But just anything that grows outdoors, 90% of them, even if they're great outdoors, they don't work indoors. So it was a really big selection factor. So that's where things really changed. And you saw some really potent herb, and it was all fascinating. It was amazing what people would grow under lights, and it still might be improving today. I mean, it's incredible, the technological side of it. But already you were beginning to see that those that survived were not all there was to it. I mean, it's a very narrow gene pool. And because of all this hybrid vigor and mixing all these things together, and we still have basically one cannabinoid that rocks everybody's socks is THC. I mean, the same varieties have a flipped chemotype and they produce way more CBD, but it's the same gene pool. You're just watching one thing sort different ways, one trait. But it hasn't, only the aromatics of what's really kept up what we think of as consumers think of as diversity. because they smell different and they taste different, but they don't have near the range of effects that they did when you had a whole bunch of things from a whole bunch of different places. So I think we'll get back to that eventually. I think consumers are waking up. I've discussed this a lot, especially with Mojave, and they're waking up. They're at least aware now, some of them, that there is a difference and something to look for that possibly is hard to find or unavailable. And they're young smokers. They're not a bunch of old guys that sit around and piss and moan about how it used to be. But maybe some of that finally leaked through. But yeah, it's catching on a little bit. I'm a bit hopeful about that. I'd like to see different varieties coming out and people just looking for something different, because if you don't look for it, you're not going to find it. So you got to get out there, look.
Well, do you think the diversity in the effect of those older varieties was because of different terpene profiles, or do you think more so different cannabinoids that have basically been bred out due to indoor cultivation and market demands?
I think it's mostly the aromatic principles. I mean, yes, there was more of a range of cannabinoids, possibly, but except for THC and CBD, I'd call them all minor cannabinoids.
Yeah.
And they're, I mean, they'd have to be 10 times the strength of THC to have the same relative physiological and mental effects. So, because there's less than 10% as much as there is of THC or more. I mean, that's pretty high. Now we have quite high CBD varieties, but they weren't terribly high in before either. But that's just simple selection. That we always thought the differences were the cannabinoids. And when the first analyses came out, and a couple of things from California, Normal did this, the San Francisco chapter, and they analyzed like 20 different things, and a couple of them had CBD, and people were like, whoa, because everything was just THC. And that was kind of an awakening for people. And then as testing came online, which was slow and rare in the beginning, people learned that some of their largely Afghan hybrid things had some fair amount of CBD in them, sometimes as much as it did THC. And that's where, in concert with the awareness of CBD, or because of, then that whole thing marched on together. And when you had all those Charlotte's Web and things before Charlotte's Web and onward from there, and now CBD varieties registered as hemp in Canada and the EU, and it's all really gone quite far, quite quickly. But yeah, that was about it. But and that CBD does have synergistic effects and alter the effects of THC, and possibly some of these other ones do. THCV, who knows? But it's never proven out. And with a few limited experiments where people have vaporized fairly large doses of these pure compounds, they don't do much. So we had to shift our perspective, which we were stubborn to shit trouble. It's not really the differences in cannabinoids. So what is it? And the more Sinsemilla varieties came online, and the more they all tasted different, suddenly or slowly became aware that the differences must lie in the way they taste. And then people noticed similarities. Hazes are speedy; they always taste the same. Okay, took years for people to really accept that, but people started noticing early on, and that's where we're at now. Is the aromatic principles. There's flavones. There's all kinds of things in cannabis, but every time they look for something new, they find it. But they're really small amounts.
Yeah, they're not enough, and they're not. Those things aren't psychoactive in that way.
Well, Ryan, I did see you post that vial of THCP and David's little comment on it, right?
Yeah, well, that compound, for example, is present in very, very low quantities. The one when they actually found it in that variety in Italy, we're talking like insignificant amounts, and they only realized that it was more potent when they did the structural assay of it, right?
Yeah.
And did some other tests on the pure compound.
These cannabinoids exist, but they're so rare in volume.
They're not.
That it's unlikely that those are the main culprit in the effect change.
Yeah, and I think also what I was going to say is we know now that THC and CBD are produced from the same precursor. right? And so it's like, for example, if you had a plant that produced 25 total or 25% total cannabinoids, if you have what we call a type 2 or a half CBD plant, it really eats up half of the THC potential, right? And so that causes a different effect because you might have like 12% THC as opposed to 25% THC on a pure CBD variety, or sorry, a pure THC variety, right? So having that presence of CBD, what it really does is it turns down the volume switch. And Rob and I were talking yesterday when we were walking about it really being about the ratio between the THC and these other volatiles, right? It's not only that they're there together. It's like what's the ratio in conjunction with them. And I personally feel that when you like, and I don't know if Rob can comment on this, having because you've been consuming for a lot longer than I have. I didn't see a lot of some of these early 70s things. I wasn't smoking when I was 2. But my hypothesis is that as we turn the THC volume up past 20, it's kind of like standing in front of your stereo with it at like, 8 or 9 on the scale. Like it's so loud that I think that you kind of blow out some of these
Yeah.
finer,
Okay.
right? And that's probably the source of why we've lost some of these more cerebral and like just the different qualities of the high is because now we're in this world where we're just blowing ourselves out with these massive amounts.
There's no space left to notice the subtleties.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like mine goes to 11. I mean, and just take another step farther. The dab thing has just taken it beyond that again. I mean, I love the purity side of things, but now that appeared to be hash-like. But I mean I'm a fan of hashish. That stuff.
This is water. This is water hash right here.
Beautiful, super nice. So yeah, it's modern tech for making, not so modern anymore. But Bubble Man, of course, is the king of that. But yeah, that's been a good one. I wanted to mention the people are so wild about Static, especially since David's secret was divulged, and but people have been making Static for a long time, and people have tried all kinds of other things. Mojave and Adam and all these guys here were messing with trying to figure it out a long time ago. And for me, it all began before I met David. I mean, he'd heard about this when I met him, but this had happened a year or two before I even met him, a year probably. And it was a product, it was an idea product. The guy sold you something, but he mostly sold you a piece of paper that told you how to do it. And it was called Azubides, the Original Astounder. And it's in the hashish book, which incidentally just came out again on Amazon. We have a facsimile version of hashish. So it's there, it's in hardcover, and yeah, it is what it is before, except I substituted very few color pictures because I found the slides when I was making the scans. So anyway, it's there if people want to find it. And the story is in there. Azubides, the Original Astounder, was sold in High Times magazine by a guy named Brooke J. Ivy. He was a wacky jazz drummer in San Luis Obispo, California. And what it was the same thing every mom had at the time. It was a 9 by 13 inch, 4-inch tall brownie pan or sheet cake pan or whatever you want to call it. My mom made brownies in it. And it had a clip-on lid. There were ones with sliding lids too, but this had to have the clip-on lid. And you'd put, there you go. That's an early version, first version. And you'd put up to 7 grams of bud, 7 grams of weed in there, broken up into little budlets, but not more than that, and shake it. Like, affirmative, assertively, and let it sit for a second, shake it for maybe 15 seconds or something. Let it sit for a couple of seconds and flip over the lid, and the resin glands will have stuck to the lid. The flower chunks moving up and down like that created a static field. I don't know which charge is on top, but on the bottom, you got nothing, just the weed lying there that progressively gets broken up more, and the glands on the top. You scrape it off with a card, tap it on a plate, do it again. And you could do it repeatedly, and every time it gets slightly greener. And pretty soon it just nothing sticks to this roof anymore. There's no resin left. So it's incredibly efficient. And you could do it today. You can do it with just a couple of grams of weed and get a couple of hits of really nice, really high test dry sift, except it isn't sifted. It's electrostatic. But so that product probably came out in 76 or something.
Interesting. I will say that in regards to Dave's method, we never released it. He told me, I never showed a single person. I was
I never told anybody either.
Yeah, so listen to the story. It's kind of wild. I was showing people carding prior. I understood that if you took a card and you went over the screen over and over and over again, you would break up enough of that contaminant in a cold enough environment and you could leave just pure heads on the top of the screen. So instead of doing this, I was just going like this with a card. Well, I showed my friend D420K and he was like, I need to get a bigger card. And so he went and bought this iTunes card. It's this giant, I think it was a small card, but it came on a big plastic, like the size of a postcard. And he started using that. And he hit me up one night. And he's like, dude, the heads are like statically attaching to this card. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's neat. But he couldn't figure it out. He was like, oh, I think on one side it's contaminant and on the other side it's heads. And he was kind of using a brush. And then this guy from nowhere named Mies came out of the internet and he said, hey, do it with a DVD case and wrap the spine of the DVD case. This gives you an idea of the timeline in parchment paper. And that began this really strange way of going back and forth the screen. And then you'd get like contaminant on one side and you get pure heads on the other. But it was very, very slow. And that's kind of how the static technique became open source.
Yeah. Well, Brooke tried really hard in the mid-70s, but not that many people got it.
Well, I never heard that story. That's
People got
incredible.
Sadhu Sams secret either, also in the book, but that was when we learned about that gold sank and shit floated. I mean, that was when the water process thing happened. And there you go.
There it is.
Diana's lovely, incredibly clear printing.
Dude,
Roddy,
seriously.
the only one who can print better than that.
Yeah, I can make that out with my 52-year-old eyes.
Yeah, me too. Fantastic.
Special tip: make your own lava lamp out of
Yeah,
resin.
there you go.
I love it.
So yeah, bit of odd humor in there, but it was amazing that we learned this, and yeah, there it was. So we just told the world, of course. So
thank you for telling the world. We appreciate that. What a history. That was definitely a big part of the history in my whole story, that's for sure. Always happy to accurately give credit where credit is due, right? Where the inspiration came. I'm not sure why people want to rewrite history when it's just like, look, we all got to stand on the shoulders of giants, like let's just tell the story on how we got there.
Well,
we didn't invent it either, and we learned it at Neville's house at the castle, visiting him one time very early in my living here. And he, if I remember the story right, learned it from Ed Rosenthal, who'd come and showed it to him and didn't tell him where he learned it, but he must have got it from somebody else, or he would have said he'd thought of it himself. So
yeah,
if that person would like to step forward, we'd all like to meet them.
Neville told me years ago that it was an unknown American, one that wasn't known, that came out from California.
That's the way that I've seen it written too.
No, it was Ed. It's way in, Ed. You can remember and tell us, but I had heard at the time with David that it was Ed that had showed him. And Ed, of course, got it from some unknown. Yes, there was an unknown other person, but I think Ed was the vector on that one. But yeah, anyway, credit where credit. It got leaked out to the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really did. Just like all of your books, man, like it may take time, but eventually what happens is that information that it plants a seed and that seed roots and that root goes deep and then it starts growing. And once it's above ground, anything is possible. And you put an enormous amount of information out there for people to do that with. And that's why we hold you in high regard. We respect you a great deal. Obviously, you're a friend and we have love for you, but also you're this other thing that's like, wow, like Rob did this stuff because he made these particular decisions, and traveled this particular path. All of these wonderful offshoots that we're currently on managed to come off of that. So I would just like to thank you, brother, for playing
Very
your
welcome.
part.
Everyone's welcome. Yeah, it's just follow. I just like to follow a path, and there's always offshoots and additional developments and learnings along the way. But cannabis is a really good path to follow.
But that's a really good point, Rob, is that your path from the beginning was plant-based, it was botany, and it was science-based. And to take a perspective that, you and David were both California natives, and this is coming out of the 60s and 70s, right? And one thing that drew me to you as a friend and as a mentor was I also came out of the late 60s and 70s was my culture and my world, but it was shrouded with misinformation on science because it was mysterious and it was unknown, and prohibition had erased a lot. So, for instance, you know, um, friends, there were friends, people were writing books like Sinsemilla, and there was stuff was trickling out there, but the driving push behind it wasn't science. And like, for instance, people would talk about hashish growing up. Hashish, how do people make hashish? There was all this mythology around how hashish was made. People had just learned how to grow weed, and it was, running naked through the field and scraping it off your body and all these weird, things. And then you were demystifying these very simple things from a agricultural botanical perspective. And I think that's what set you and David apart from the rest of the world and even Amsterdam. I mean, when I moved to Amsterdam in 93, there was still a lot of crystal, healing power, herb love stuff going on, and there is today. But just this driving push towards science being what defines the truth. And so that I think I just want to thank you for that. And when did you decide that that was going to be your path? Um, you know,
Ooh. When I was really, really young, I was going to be a marine biologist. Even when I went to Santa Cruz, that was what I was interested in, or maybe forestry, because I took these aptitude tests as we did back then. It said I should do a outdoor scientific. Well, I did outdoor stuff. I was a fisherman, backpacker and stuff, and I was interested in the environment, and I was obviously a science nerd already. So yeah, that was kind of good suggestion from the system. But I didn't, certainly wasn't planning to become an ethnobotanist or even a botanist for that matter. But I've always been interested in this scientific method. I was part of junior oceanographers when I was in junior high school. I lived near Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So my mom worked for the university. So I was part of that from, I don't know, 13 years old or something. I did that instead of scouts. I mean, I was in scouts for a while, but I did other more nature things. Went fishing a lot. But yeah, that was science has always been of interest to me. I had science kits. I had a little microscope when I was a kid. I got for Christmas when I was a little kid. I had a chemistry set. I had the biology set where you got pickled stuff you could cut up, and I didn't like that much. But yeah, my parents fed me science stuff. Neither of them were scientists, but yeah. I think my dad always wished he'd been a scientist. But anyway. Yeah, for me, I just mm,
Well, you certainly influenced my path. I mean, your book was one of I think it was like the third book I read on cannabis. And I was in university at the time. And I immediately, going through your book and realizing that there was all these, you know, all this scientific literature behind it.
yeah.
And that sent me right to the stacks. right?
Yeah.
And we had just come across these, obviously this is pre-Google, not really pre-internet, but right at the beginning of the internet. And you didn't really have good databases. So you'd end up sitting there in front of the, you know,
Yeah.
computer in the library and just scrolling through stuff and finding scientific articles and trying to track them down. And
Yeah.
it was,
Thank God for open stacks.
yeah, but man, you ever send me down on the path and realizing that I could go deep on it? And it just, it just kept expanding.
That's what Mark did with me. I mean, finding Mark's book in the library, I had exactly the same experience. Like, well, hell, he could do it. And here's a whole bunch of list of places to get started. And that wasn't exactly what I was going to do. But as you know, at library research, one thing leads to another. Now the internet leads you for one thing to another, but you still have to do the right search. And you can change a search word, a search phrase by one small word, and you get a whole bunch of same, but different
Now, people don't
things.
realize the importance of bibliographies in
Yeah.
scientific papers, because it's like you want to go and read all those references yourself. You don't just take the word of that one person. So every paper really is like a trailhead, right? That leads you down further roads of discovery and thinking. And now with cannabis, it's almost endless, right? I mean, there's
Yeah, it really is. I'm writing a new book. I've been working on it almost 2 years now. And I had this realization a few months ago that I do have to kind of cap it off here pretty soon, or there'll be more material coming in every day than I can process, summarize, and put in a book. I'll never finish. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. And part of I will explain this explosion in the part of the preface, but no, it's awesome. I mean, there's just literally now instead of a few hundred, I don't read everything. I don't read all the medical stuff. I pass this by, but I'm just talking about things that relate at least tangentially to botany. And there's several things a week that I have to read. There's other things I file and I'll get to before I finish, but it's incredible. It's
Yeah.
a tidal wave of information. So yeah, it's hard to remain. I've always tried to be kind of be a jack of all trades, Renaissance man kind of thing in science, know a little bit about different things to kind of help people know a little bit about a variety of things. But we're so specialized these days. It's hard to know even a little bit about something. It's every field has layers and layers of research and knowledge, and it all comes so cool. Even when you really try to filter hard, it's hard to focus on what you're doing. But it's great. I mean, my God, better than the paucity of stuff we had before. She was in the 90s, there was like nothing coming out. The 70s, there was plenty of stuff because the anti cannabis people were financing all kinds of really good research, incidentally, folks. I mean, the opposite side never really found much wrong with cannabis, but they certainly learned a lot of basic information about this plant in their search. So we can thank them for that. And the United Nations, above all, they financed heaps of good research. But that came out in the 70s, the 80s, it dropped right off. In the 90s, there's paucity of stuff until near the end of the 90s.
The 80s drug war killed it, and then Howlett's discovery with Devan of the receptor opened up that whole world of the 90s, because that's what I was doing. My undergrad was kind of mid to early 90s, and the endocannabinoid system was relatively new, right? It was back then it was like CB1, CB2, anandamide, and 2AG, right? And it's blown up into this massive system. But I think that also pulled back some of the acceptance, because it was at that point in time it became just undeniable about the medical and the therapeutic value. 95 was Prop 215, and
Right.
in my opinion, that was kind of the domino that set this whole thing off around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
And that
been
was only 2 years ago. Incredible. I mean, the last, since not very long ago that all this has happened, it's really picked up. The Sanjay Gupta moment, what year was that? That was an important sort of
yeah,
catalyst.
20 or 2010ish, or maybe a little later than that. Yeah,
Was that Charlotte, Fiji?
yeah.
Yeah, that was the last leg of prohibition against medical cannabis. No one except Chris Christie wanted to argue with parents whose children were having hundreds of seizures a day and then just didn't have a seizure for like 13 days from one drop of cannabis oil. That was
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and I'd comment on like the 215 days here in California, when all these shops started opening up, they lacked a conversation, they lacked an interface with the consumer and the patient because there wasn't information. And that's one of the things that I did quite a bit was kind of, because I just come back from Amsterdam and I knew Rob, honestly, that was, people would ask me like, what do we say to like a patient? And having Rob's books be like the language of, for one, like Hashish had so much information on cannabinoid and terpenes, and the entourage effect concept hadn't really sunk in the US, definitely not as a sales, tool. But those books to the 215 era were like the way people spoke to a patient because there was a language that they had. It wasn't just weed's good for cancer and AIDS. It was like, what is weed? Well, okay, there's this book. It has all these different things. Here's a chart, you know. So I wanted to ask you, Rob, about about hashish, because to me that book, isn't just about hashish. It's an amazing book about cannabis and cannabis ethnobotany and culture and everything. And when did you go down that path? Because that was just an amazing publication. When did you decide that your next thing was going to be to do this book, hashish?
That was when I moved to Amsterdam. Not long after I lived there, because I mean, to European smokers, hashish was what marijuana was to North American smokers. And when I say North American, I really mean U.S. American. Canadians on the East Coast, they were Quebec, because it was very much related to Europe and its trade and its appreciation of hash. And so I can't speak for all of North America that way, but basically we were a weed culture, and they just didn't smoke weed in Europe, not hardly at all. A little bit. If you went to the Transkai coffee shop and got some old Durban, great. But that was, even in those days, more for tourists, and it wasn't common anyway. Everybody came and smoked hash in Amsterdam. So I met people in the trade. I met people who had interesting stories and had been to all these interesting places. And I realized actually weren't just telling war stories, but had information. I could like interview them and get tips from here and there and leave out the war stories, which I kind of wish I'd taped or written down. They were all great, but most of those people are gone now. But I consciously left them out. And that's one reason people told me a lot of stuff, is because I always left that out. But yeah, that was the impetus, really, was moving here to a hashish culture and being able to do that. And then we started, because we're curious, messing around with hash. I mean, there was water hash, there was electrostatic things, there was always a quest to make more concentrated, not extracts, but concentrates. So yeah, for sure. And the cultural side, well, that came from my ethnobotany interest peaking in graduate school just before that. So that's where that comes through.
What was your work at grad school at Indiana?
I basically was growing plants and trying to be taxonomic about things. And terpenes were actually where I was headed with it. And I had a long way to go still. Carl Hillig continued basically what I wanted to do. I didn't meet Carl before he went there. I met Carl not long after he started there, but he followed up with terpenes and also started the allozyme analysis, different enzyme configurations. But that was some of the first real chemo taxonomy that people had done. And Carl did great work. He's the guy who came up with the whole concept of the different gene pools, as I would call them. I mean, he had broad leaflet, wide leaflet, he called it, hemp, and narrow leaflet hemp, and the things that Mark and I picked up on. And that's all Carl's minor
Really?
tweak of what Carl had already done. Yeah, he published it in his dissertation and with a couple of papers with Mahlberg. And he also did terpenes. And he was the first one who said that there were these guaian and guaiol and these things in Afghan that weren't in anything else. And yeah, Carl's work is amazing, actually. I've based a lot of what I do on his basic findings.
I wish he had more plants per N, more N's per grouping.
Yeah, it was a small greenhouse.
Yeah.
But yes, it was on the roof of the building, same greenhouse. So yeah, tiny. But,
right.
Yeah, he was trying to have as much diversity as possible, and he didn't have enough males in there either, actually, if you want to look at that. But yeah. But he
and also
started a lot of other people doing it.
Absolutely.
Rob, you started in these few pages in Hashish where you're on the cannabinoids, sesquiterpenes, and sesquiterpenoids, diterpenoids, triterpenoids. I mean, this was in when you published this in 1998. Obviously, you've been researching this for quite some time, but this was well before the entourage effect had become widely accepted, or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, how did the research in this book lead to a bigger understanding of cannabis as in terms of its composition, and also just who else? I mean, who else put this information out there at this time? Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's out there in lots of white papers, but really, I just want to, emphasize how important this book became to all of us for creating the language that we use to explain cannabis to consumers, to the industry, to everyone. There wasn't another version of this for many years, just.
Yeah, well, look at what happened when he didn't create a new edition. That book is like $400 or $500 or $600 because that's the value of that book. People are like, yeah, I'll pay that. Like, if that's what I got to do, I got to do it. But it is available again, correct? Because I went to look for the new edition.
It's on Amazon. It should be there. Yeah,
it keeps showing me the old one.
There's a link to it. There's another one. It's a different cover. Just if you scroll.
Yeah, the
that's
La Paz one. I just can't see it.
Yeah, and here you guys look at this. I should mark out all the addresses on here, right? This is the original hash files, the book.
That's amazing.
All the information in here.
I just posted in the chat. There's a paper from Ross, where he talks about terpenes, the volatiles from cannabis. I believe that was 88.
Yeah,
so
that's pretty.
I'm sure that was probably one of the ones that set you.
That's one of the ones I've seen. Yeah, there were not that many terpene analyses, and they were only the basic ones, pretty much. I mean, it didn't get too complicated. And some of that work came from University of Mississippi too, and a lot of that.
That's where Ross was. He was.
Ross was there at El Sully's lab. Yeah, or Turner's lab, maybe still at that point, but no, El Sully's lab. But yeah, that's right at the turning point there. No, that was there were some Germans and others who had looked at terpenes in hashish samples a bit, and but not much. There wasn't a whole lot out there. Wasn't a whole lot. But enough to get you to realize that there was differences between different varieties and different pieces of hash, and that they were volatile, and the older the samples were, the less was in there, and some of the basic stuff. And that was all, it seems like just common logic now, which it is. But when you find some scientist who went through the whole scientific method and came up with that conclusion, then I at least have a much better feeling about believing what they said. It's for whatever reason they did it. There's been a lot of science on the dark side. I mean, a lot of really good science has been done by forensic scientists who are trying to find ways to stick it to people in the cannabis business. It's bad intent, but good science. And I think that in a way needs to be recognized as well.
I think a lot of people think that Osoli and maybe even Mahlbergs Lab, like because they were DEA licensed, they were part of the Death Star. But I think that people don't realize a lot of those guys are quite pro cannabis, and they're
Oh,
very
yeah.
much the plant like we are.
Yeah,
They bend the
absolutely.
rules.
They're just part of the team that got the license, right? But I think that a lot of people in the cannabis community kind of see those guys as, foot soldiers of the empire.
Well, yeah, I mean, University of Mississippi was foot soldiers of the DEA. I mean, they were their lab that analyzed samples that they seized from people. It's also why they have a database of more that did. They have a database of like 10,000 seizures or something. Even years ago, when I had a chance to have access to this stuff, because they shared it. I mean, the
Right.
first analyses that Jim and
They were
Ed had
contracted to build
done
it.
by Mississippi,
They were contracted to build that lab, really. Not the lab,
Yeah,
but I mean, to do the work of the analysis for the DEA.
right.
Right.
And also they're also to grow the medicinal cannabis that was distributed to so few people. But
Right.
in research,
LV and Irv.
it was right there. But yeah, it was what a total 14 or something max, I think, in the heyday. But yeah, they were responsible for that too. So yeah, it was all kind of right there. It was one, they scratched each other's backs, that's for sure. But the National Institute of Health and did the research side more, and the Drug Enforcement Administration had their control there as well. So yeah, but
They
good
had
science was done. Super good science still being done. So yeah, whatever.
I think it's an interesting concept to kind of think that because we were spending taxpayer money to keep cannabis illegal, we actually got, like you said, some pretty good research early on cannabis. And it also basically like the government suppressing cannabis supply made the value of cannabis so high that there became that this entire business and everything blossomed from that essentially subsidized value created by the DEA, and they're doing the research to kind of for us to for the plant to essentially win at the end of the day, which it basically has at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The plant is definitely as an ethnobotanist, you're not supposed to get too anthropomorphic, but the plant has definitely used us to its advantage. If you want to flip it around,
I've got an interesting question for you, Rob. Do you think there is any plant other than cannabis that's more widely cultivated in more places around the world today?
in more volume, sure, the major crops in diversity of geography, probably none, and certainly not combined with its diverse uses. I mean, you've got bamboos that grow in a wide range of places, but people don't smoke them. They eat them, they build things out of them, whatever, almost everything else. And the brassicas, all the broccolis and rapeseed and all that, good vegetables, not real fiber, but all kinds of seed oils and things. But no, nothing has the diversity of uses and the geographical diversity that cannabis has. Nothing I can think of.
Well, and when you think about it too, in any city, there's probably thousands of indoor grows of cannabis, right? Even still to this day, there's not thousands of indoor grows of anything else. Nobody's paying that kind of
No.
money to grow. Maybe orchids would be a close second at most.
Right. I mean, we're getting to a level. I mean, indoor growers used to have an exercise closet or an attic and actually make not just stash, but maybe make a little money on the side when weed was worth astronomical amounts. But now we're getting back to the initial level we started at in the 70s, hobbyists. And anybody who's in the seed business will tell you that their seed sales are primarily to hobbyists. They're small amounts to individuals. And you can't possibly call that commercial anymore. I mean,
But
sure, they're supplying their friends and themselves, but nobody's making any money. They're spending money now to plant those seeds and bring them to maturity. So it's a hobby, and it's spreading more, I think, more than ever, because now people don't have to worry so much if their hobby smells and their neighbor notices it. So I think that's
LED
spread.
LED lights and tents too have made it a lot
Yeah,
easier to
yeah,
set up a grow room. I mean, like
yeah.
HIDs and the higher power usage and running your 240 line, you can put up a couple LEDs with just a couple, 20 amp circuits in a regular bedroom and have
Yeah,
a pretty decent grow. You don't need a big air conditioner. It's pretty, like you said, you can get away with the smell now. So I think it's
charcoal filters, whatever. It's
yeah,
all the
it's just interesting to think that how much this plant has won. Like you said, it's really taken advantage of us because there's no other plant that humans go through as much trouble to grow. And if people lived on Antarctica permanently, I bet you there'd be an indoor grow there too.
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I mean, a lot of the funding around LED research was initially from NASA to like, what is it, Utah State or whatever with Bugby's lab. And that was to figure out what can you grow in outer space. And where did that industry end up going in terms of a model? It is to cannabis, the whole controlled
Where's the
ag.
money to drive it? I mean, and Fletch, I mean, you did the same thing with the fridge, with that freeze dryer, right? It's like cannabis is driving this kind of evolution of the way that we do things. It's like it drives technology. It's driving the way, like what other crops are tested like cannabis, right? Like,
Yeah.
pesticides. It's like we're kind of bringing, and even appreciation for the scent compounds. Like, we're looking at volatiles and all these other plants, not because of cannabis, but the commercial aspect is, right? They're starting to sell it.
That's right. And if you Google anything about growing anything in the world, cannabis comes first. Right. So it doesn't matter what search engine you use, but you just Google, like, I want to grow at home or whatever. And I grow all kinds of stuff at home here in the backyard. And it does cost me more per ear of corn to grow corn in my backyard than it costs me to buy corn at the market. And so we're slowly seeing that shift with cannabis now, where the price of cannabis is getting so low that to grow a pound of weed at home, it's getting pretty close to the cost of just buying a pound of weed somewhere else. So it's an interesting shift. But you mentioned, Fletch, you mentioned, other crops and stuff. And Rob, I would wonder if you could talk a little bit about the botany of desire, because you were apparently interviewed for that. And that, I think, was a really important book for just people understanding this thing called agriculture, and cannabis was really seminal in that narrative. So
Yeah,
share a
the
little bit.
origins of well-known plants in general. It was and what plant better known and more controversial than cannabis? But what was those other topics? Apples, potato. What did you four plants? What was the fourth?
Rose, I think.
I thought tulips were one.
Tulips,
Tulips
maybe.
is one. Yeah, the
Potatoes? No?
Yeah. I think potatoes is there. Yeah, they were in there.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful book, and he has his. If it weren't for cannabis, I don't think he would have written the book, because it was kind of the back theme through the whole thing. Started with his interest in cannabis because somebody had a plant in a garden, or he did in his garden, and he made it rather personal. So it ran through the whole thing. He came to Amsterdam and wanted to interview me, and I forget how he got a hold, but we went to the Greenhouse Coffee Shop across the street, Annie Reekin and I, and everybody got baked. Let me just put it that way, totally baked. And I think that was part of, he quotes me a couple times in the book lightly, but it's I think that's where he really got that there was so much of a relationship between cannabis, not just his relationship and his neighbors and the weed growers, if you'd known, but this thing that was bigger thing going on, bigger power maybe. And it was interesting. He came out with a great book. It was fascinating to read. It's a good one. Yeah.
That's cool that he interviewed you for that.
Yeah, then we came, and I don't remember how he got a hold of me. Through a publisher, I guess, maybe. I really don't remember. But he came to Amsterdam. He was probably interviewing other people too. But we had a good sesh. It was excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his work. I've read a lot of his books: Omnivore's Dilemma, How to Change Your Mind, Botany of Desire. Good stuff.
Omnivore's Dilemma really Botany of Desire did him well, but Omnivore's Dilemma really pushed him over. I
just think it showed how unbiased he is as a writer. Like, he just wouldn't choose a side, if there even was a side. And when talking about diet, there kind of always is a side.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Science doesn't pick sides, so that's the point.
I'm
Right?
going to
That's right.
disappear for just a minute and de-water and re-water, and I'll be right back.
Excellent.
Enjoy the
Excellent.
scenery.
Man, I'm so excited. This is so great. By the way, everyone in chat, there's over 400 people watching live right now, so it's like a good number Hash Church audience, and people are really loving the stories and the questions, guys. Might have to hit a bong rip.
I think another kind of interesting thing, just with Rob and cannabis and all the work that they did, is like he was just saying with the botany desire guy, how much this plant relates to so many different people, and that's why it's cultivated in so many different places. And I think as we're finally going to see cannabis normalized and all the hot air comes out of the market, I think a lot of passion projects are finally going to come back because there's not a financial motivation to just breed purple and frosty shit anymore. It's like you want to grow $800 pounds, grow purple and frosty. That's you're going to need something else. You're going to need to offer something else than just providing a product. And Rob and Dave were just so far ahead of everybody else. It's taken us almost 20, 30 years to take the stuff that was in this book, all the knowledge that you could gain from this, and even put it to market, right?
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's
And
partly the
it's just
marketing.
crazy to think, that all of they could have all done this 30 years ago had it not been subsidized by legalization to create the scene that we have. But it's just cool to we're in a really special time, I think, for the evolution of cannabis in general. We have just it's all compressed in a short enough period of time that we do have a fair bit of the original genetics that were around. There's a lot of people I've seen popping old seeds and getting plants from them and reintroducing stuff into the and even if like myself, stuff I collected 20 years ago, well, I know that's relatively not hybridized if it was not hybridized from then before and it's only was 15, 20 years old at that point. And I think it'll
Dave,
be finally interesting to see things evolve again and see what comes out.
I'll tell you, Diana just popped some seeds here for the window, and we were talking about what the best thing to grow would be, and I said, "Well, take some of the hay seeds." It's like if that was David's favorite, why don't you take some of those and plant them this year? And so she put down, I think, like 15 of them. I think every single one came up. Right.
A
So
little, a little sprinkle of pot ash.
yep, went in there.
Yeah, I
And
think that I think prohibition shaped the market, and I used to freak out about it because as a kid growing up, I just kind of watched like cannabis change, like visually and effect wise and stuff, and I used to have this kind of like fear that we lost something or like the man changed cannabis, but in hindsight, I feel like it just changed the market. It changed it. It created a market demand, a prohibition-based market demand, and not it didn't change the gene pool because the gene pool was hiding in little cracks and crevices. And it reminds me of a story that Rob told me years ago about the wine industry in USSR, how it got completely decimated by the market, but the diversity in the gene pool stayed in the backyard, in the homes, in the hobbyists, and that was the saving grace for that for that region. And I think it's the same with cannabis that like 20 years later, from 20 years from now, we're going to see a lot of amazing cannabis that came not necessarily out of the Dutch seed industry or the California dispensary scene, but it's going to come out of our backyards from seed producers who are distributing fire that they had hidden, because it's slowly trickling back.
well, interestingly enough, I mean, can't like we keep always saying, cannabis is an obligate outcrosser, and one of the things that does is it keeps random recessive mutations just kind of hidden in the genome. And as people start doing like these isolated inbreedings, like for example, Freak Show, right? That weird leafy kind of fern-looking leaf plant. That was just someone who was inbreeding in their a population in their backyard, and they had a random mutation in that leaf, in that gene associated with the leaf, and you get two copies of that together, of this random gene that normally never shows up in two pairs, finally pairs up, you get that mutation expressed. And I'm sure that like ABC, the development of that ABC, Australian bastard cannabis, whatever they call it these days, Bindi or whatever it was. But that's the same thing, right? It's just a population inbreeding somewhere, and we get this recessive gene combination come together, and you get a weird new expression. And yeah, that's one of the, it has been. I mean, even with the ChemDog and some of these other lines, that one there on Mojave's picture, it's like these things happen when there's small pools that are just inbred together, and you get an interesting population or mutation pop out, and it leads to things like these rare random phenotypes, physical phenotypes, but also things like CBG, right? CBG dominance happens when we have a broken THC or CBD gene, right? And the
Actually, you have to have both of them broken. So yeah,
yeah.
That's when you start dealing with mutations at two loci, I mean, that really makes the odds much lower of getting what you want just with adding one more trait. So
but
yeah,
that's really
not all to be disabled. All that chemistry is pretty amazing, really.
Yeah.
Well, how about this for a perspective? 420 High Hopes just said this in the chat room. We took away the male from the picture, so the female cannabis plant now is using male humans as a method of reproduction. It's interesting.
And we're giving them silver. Giving them jewelry. It's funny you say that we're how cannabis has influenced us, but the plant that came into contact with humanity is not the plant that we have today.
No.
Right? These big massive flowers full of terps and cannabinoids, like that did not exist.
No.
So it's really an example of coevolution. And I think it's arguable that I was saying this yesterday with Rob, there's a cannabis neurotype, right? Like there's a certain amount of people that cannabis really does benefit their mental, not their mental state, but their neurochemical state, right? And I think that there's probably something to that, especially with certain people on a spectrum. There's just something about cannabis that makes you feel good in a way that you can go about your day in this society, right?
Well, it's interesting to me. I mean, it's about coevolution. It's all about how hard you want to drive the concept, but I'm more at your end of it. I mean, two things happening in concert with an exchange of influences back and forth, not strictly just keeping it on the gene level, but it's definitely true. And it just amazes me. Bobby and I often talk about this. It's like, okay, we developed this endocannabinoid system. I mean, so did sea urchins, pretty much everything but bees for some reason, the bees and ants. But it's in almost every living organism, some form of the system. So it's really primal. And then along came cannabis and has these compounds that fit in that system. There are not any other plants that at least we use for anything that fit into that system. So it's just serendipitous, or you can go totally cosmic and say something else. But it's just amazing that these two independently now very much co-evolving together, but they've evolved independently and then came together rather magically.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue, beta-caryophyllene binds to CB2. It doesn't bind to CB1, right? It doesn't bind to that system that gets us high, but beta-caryophyllene is in a ton of different herbs and pepper, and that binds to CB2. And, I was saying last week, there's evidence that shows that beta-caryophyllene can reduce ulcerative colitis through CB2, right, in the gut. So they technically call it a dietary cannabinoid.
Yeah, I call it the dietary cannabinoid, but that's about where it sticks in the system and a little bit about its structure. It's a terpene instead of a terpenophenolic, but I mean, CBD, all the cannabinoids are half terpene. So and they come for the same pathway as CBG and all the rest, just a little farther back on it. But yeah, they're all really closely related to begin with. So yeah, I mean, it's all this. Yeah, I think all this coevolutionary stuff is fascinating. How have we evolved together? And culturally, from an ethnobotanical perspective, it's obvious. There's all kinds of examples. Looking at it as on a more of a chemical level, it's more difficult to suss out for me. But yeah,
You can definitely see it. I mean, look, I think that you've probably even seen this. I know people that can't deal with terpinolene varieties, right?
uh,
And I know people that really like them. They prefer those over the other stuff.
sure,
And that's even just kind of like one level of trait. But there's also the people that you've seen, you know, some of us might have them as partners that they're just not even into cannabis. Like they don't like
yeah,
it, like the way that it
yeah,
interacts.
not their
So
thing at all. Yeah,
it's really like the number of humans that are interacting with the plant versus the number of different breedings of the plant, because breedings of the plant keep bringing up these different, chemical individuals is really what they are. They're
yeah,
different chemical types.
yeah,
And, like Fletch and Mojave and myself, we try to find good ones and share them with people. And we're really just throwing against a bunch of different genotypes of the plant against a bunch of different genotypes of the people.
yeah,
And,
yeah. Very
some
true.
work, some don't. And it's like
It
the more we
it's
do it,
way
the more we grow this thing, right?
it's too complicated, is what I always say. It's just like it's not like opium or ethanol or anything else. Like trying to marry this like plant human relationship together the way those other plants can. It's a different story. And the weird thing, I think, I sorry I missed the beginning of this conversation, is that I think historically, I don't know, Rob, if you can, but if this is true, but historically, the amount of people that interface with cannabis is very small, relatively, back in the day, right? Just because the population, the production centers and stuff, it was relatively small as a drug, right? And today we're probably seeing the biggest ever human cannabis
Giving it
interface,
to
right?
babies, right? We're
Yeah,
giving versions of it to babies,
right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a new thing. And but we have this kind of misconception because we have an endocannabinoid system that humans and cannabis have this intertwined relationship for millennia, but it's really relatively fresh to us, which to me is what's so fascinating about this coevolution thing is that like we we split, like on the evolutionary path, we split and created these two different systems on a plant and then on the animal side, and then came back together just right now, like in the evolutionary clock at like 11:59 and 59 seconds, cannabis and humans actually found each other. And that's why it's so dynamic and so interesting. And it just happens to be that humans are heavily populated all around the world now and very diverse. And cannabis is now heavily populated and really somewhat diverse. So to me, it's a fascinating ethnobotany story that is so different than, I
Well, it's
mean,
just
wine and beer are so important in human evolution and technology and society and culture because they've been so prevalent amongst the masses. But cannabis is much more narrow.
But it's just starting. I mean, listen, all these varieties that I made down at NAPRO with the weird combinations of cannabinoids that just you don't see in the market. That stuff has never even been able to hit the market, right? And it's like, what would that do if you start bouncing that off different genotypes of people, right? Like, I'm sure that you're going to find all sorts of, like, we made these varieties that were six THC to one CBD and eight THC to one CBD as a ratio. So you could crank that up to, 25, 30%. But just that elevated like 2.5 to 4% CBD was enough that it didn't really get in the way of the high, like that how intense the effect was, which is what people want, right? But it took the edge off. And I'm sure you give that stuff to like newer consumers and they'd have a better experience, right? And it's just for whatever reason, mostly market forces. It's like you can't sell enough of that stuff to make it worthwhile because all the bud tenders are pushing and culture is pushing everybody towards the highest THC plant,
Yeah.
right? And so we're missing all these plants that I know I enjoyed them, right? Like they have even for stuff like we never did this because we didn't have enough production, or not enough production, but enough demand for the production. Was that we could make plants like you were talking about yesterday, Rob, with the how you play with the ratio of terpenoids to THC, right, to cannabinoids. So you could have a plant like right now, like a 15% plant would never make it in the market. But if you had a 15% plant that was 5% terpenoids, that's a different experience as an extract versus a 25% THCA plant that has 5% terpenoids,
Mm.
right? And it's like, so being able to like have different ratio plants that you can then concentrate gives you really like a whole new product class.
I mean,
And no,
especially if you're concentrating, you take such a concentrated hit like a dab, that sort of angle, vape pen, whatever. You don't need to have the actual titer of THC so high.
exactly.
You can just breathe a little more of it, and then you get a bunch more terps with it, which is actually what you're after. I mean, you don't. Yeah, people get enough THC. They don't get enough terps, I think.
And they're always driving for more THC, and it's like, unfortunately, it
This
puts
day and age.
what I think the ultimate win is not to make the best weed for the stoners. Sure, I want to do that too, but I want to have more people smoking cannabis, or not smoking cannabis, but more people interacting with the plant,
Well, more
right?
people, but more the different genotypes find each other.
Yeah,
So yeah, the more
yeah.
variety
It
it
doesn't have
is,
to
the
be
better.
like the
Yeah.
smashing in your face 35% THCA stuff, right?
No, no,
And
no.
more weed for farmers to sell too, I think is important. That, like getting to these lower number percentages and, like, do you want to sell 2 pounds or 1 pound? And farmers need to grow more and sell more because that's just the nature of being a farmer. And the reality is, like, we all know that there's plenty of THC. And it's funny because, like, I deal with people I was talking to someone the other day who needs a bunch of washing genetics to wash, right? But they need diversity in their genetics, right? Like we can't, I'm like, well, there's some washers that hit 7% yield. Do you want just those? No, 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 we need diversity. Well, what if it's a 3% yield, 4% yield compared to 7? Like, well, we have to have diversity. We need products from different aroma profiles. I'm like, well, okay. So now you bred variety A to hit at 30%, but it only returns at a 3% yield. And then variety B could have been half of that with a double the return, right? And so much of the market is moving towards extract. It's like that's more important in the yield than the THC amount by far. So a 25% or if it's 20 or 30%, that's a 30% difference. But if it's 3% or 6%, come on. So it's like this whole mentality of of higher THC. And I'd also point out, I feel that some of the people that consume terpenoline and have issues with it, or those narrow leaf varieties that spin them out, are usually because they're too potent, not because of the profile as much. That same thing in a really low potency, smoke less of it, has a really nice effect that doesn't overwhelm people. It's just that when you do a 20+% hit of high terpenoline cannabis, that's a hit. That's like they call it a hit for a reason. It's as much as you can take without getting knocked out, right? And that's to me what people want is, do we want cannabis that helps people function like coffee, like your daily thing that you do all day? Or do you want cannabis to be like beer or opioids where you take a hit and get really high,
I think if you have the variety available, the user, the person who's purchasing will be the deciding factor for all of those experiences.
Well, yeah,
Make them available, I say.
The key is to provide the variety. Yeah, it's just make it available.
I have a question for Rob. Do you think that there was some diversity lost because of prohibition that we can't find out of the plant again?
I almost certainly. And there are those who'll say that the alleles still exist there, but that's how do you make the combinations again? It's hard to randomly put back together the deck of cards you dropped on the floor to the order they came in the pack.
Well, especially when you don't know what half the suits or numbers are.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, even if it was that simple, and there's more than 52 of them, so yeah, they're there. The genes are not necessarily extinct, but the combinations probably are. And yeah,
And
yeah, I mean, yeah.
what percent? How bad off are we?
Well, I don't think we're that bad off, but we have to widen our horizons and go back a few steps with what's still there to remix again. There are land races out there. I mean, yeah, look at what the India Landrace Exchange guys are doing. Trident Seeds, that bunch out of India. My God, they got a network of people all over the place collecting really cool land races, and they themselves work with them and have plenty of friends, a lot of them in California, as it turns out, who grow their seeds and report back about what happens with them. They have a network of things going on. These are really these kind of people are the kind of people that make me so happy because it's a bit beyond a hobby, but that's where it started. Now they're trying to figure out how to really make a business out of it. But
even
they write
Aurora,
good books, they educate people, they fucking, they do good stuff.
well, even
So
And
Aurora, they discovered
based on
when Aurora
based on
discovered their,
go ahead,
when Aurora
Ryan.
discovered their private or powdery mildew gene, that
mm,
was they went back to a landrace variety, and I think it
yeah,
was a rainy variety, and grabbed that one gene because it was essentially fixed this
sure.
mutant version of the gene that left everything susceptible.
Yeah.
So
There's plenty
that's
to go
really
back to.
even David, when he was growing land races, the stuff that he brought back to California, he said most of it was junk. Like even the amount of Thai plants that he filled in the Hortapharm greenhouse and went through and just was a complete waste of time.
All the Afghans. We grow every year we grow at least 50 Afghan females from somebody's new batch they brought in. It's like 4 or 5 years in a row. We finally, now 3 or 4 years, we finally last year we just gave up on it. We never found anything. The Hindu Kush that we had that we used for years was fantastic. It was just an early grab. A1 was great, but all this stuff would come and it'd grow beautiful plants and they'd just turn to mold. There was never one that ever had any kind of resistance. And yeah,
As
there's
much,
nothing special about
yeah,
any of them.
we've done so much with the hybridization that we've done. Like you really, like, like you're saying, the changes in the plant of the last 30, 40 years. That's a lot that's been done by closet breeders.
Yeah,
But the
it's
thing that we've
entirely.
been leaving out as we go along those things is we've been so heavily selecting for cannabinoid content and flower structure and, resin content and scent. We're kind of leaving all the important agricultural traits like resistances and proper
Yeah,
structure and
yeah,
habitat.
definitely.
So that but when
Under,
you're improving corn, like if you're breeding, you want to do something to a corn variety, you don't go back to the wild relative and start growing like Teosinte, right? You just go a few steps back, and then if you have to use those wild relatives to capture like one gene, you just go
yeah,
back to one gene, but you back cross it into the modern stuff.
right, exactly. And I don't really believe that there's um any wild populations truly untouched by the hand of humans. Maybe somewhere, but cannabis has gotten around so much. It's become such a cosmopolitan plant, even centuries ago. It had gotten around to lots of places. And it's the thing that amazes me is all the feral phenotypes in these places. It doesn't matter if it's the Midwest, stuff that escaped from hemp from Europe, or if it's Central Asian feral looking stuff, or it's outside of temple in Yunnan province of Tibetan temple. It all looks the same. It looks like a little Christmas tree. It's usually not more than 2 meters tall, usually more around a meter or less. Little Christmas tree shape, sparse branches, not too many flowers, and it ripens seeds from as soon as it flowers till it dies. And it's I talk about atavism sometimes, the return to previous states, in this case, previous phenotypes. And I think this happens really fast. I don't think a plant has to escape the grasp of agriculture for very long to start looking like that. It's just the survivor phenotype. And I
Right.
think we get back to that's the plant that they met. Or for our ancestors, that's the thing they met. Something look like that. And it's it's not all that attractive. I mean, it had some edible seeds and I suppose a little sparkle on them from time to time if you're there at the right timing. But yeah, I mean, generally that's I think what we started with. In Nepal, they look much the same. They got a little more resin on them, and they're, back and forth with ones that are a little more selected. They're not quite as feral, you might say. They're feral with a bridge, but yeah, there's this survivor phenotype. It's, I think, the best way I can describe it. And plants revert back to that almost everywhere. We saw a lot of different ones at the USDA variety comparisons this year that they did, and they all looked almost all the same. Some are a little bigger and smaller, some had a little more curved branches at the bottom, but remarkably similar. Or everything else from all over the rest of the planet that they had there was quite different from those and the other ones of, yeah, there's a lot of diversity in those fields, but the most similar bunch of populations were the feral ones.
Well, it's the plant that would survive without human help.
Yeah, that's the way it just does it on its own. Yeah.
How would you describe that early Hindu Kush that you said was a winner?
It was airier high than most Afghans, and it had a good flavor to it too. It had a good, not really sweeter side, but it had a mintier, nicer high to it. It wasn't dank. It wasn't particularly Afghan. It was looked like one, but it didn't have any of the danky, more hashy kind of flavors. It was a beautiful plant, and it hybridized well with skunk. That's what hog was. But
where do you think the more danky hash planty, let's say someone's trying to, I think a lot of people, this is often discussed online, people are like, oh, just go back to landrace. And just like a lot of people that have tried that, you find a lot of not so desirable things. If you were going through landrace, and let's say you're looking for skunky, where would you look? And how would you modernize that into a new variety? What do you think? Based on your experience.
well, first of all, you'd have to find one you liked. That's the struggle. I mean,
Right.
breeding with it down line, there's a whole bunch of paths you can take. But I mean, for instance, everybody wants the roadkill skunk back. Okay.
Right.
Well, we grew lots and lots of imported Afghans, and we let them flower as long as they could till they molded and went in the trash. But none of them smelled like roadkill skunk. They smelled like all kinds of organic, nasty, anywhere from, all kinds of bad smells. We don't need to mention them all, but organic kind of smells, not your fruity, flowery stuff, but more spoilage and waste sort of aromas. And they're nasty. I really don't like them. I never have. And when that comes through as dank or whatever, I think that was the most popular term for that general funk. I mean, that to me, dank is how your grandma's basement smelled at the end of the summer. I mean, it
Musky.
was, yeah, musky, not very nice necessarily. And I've been through a lot of landrace descriptions, modern ones, from guys who've collected them and grown them. The few landrace companies that really have some good information out there. Musky is actually a term that's used quite a lot to describe both what's considered, for the sake of easy communication, sativas or indicas. They overlap a lot. A lot of the terms, interestingly, do the descriptive terms, and some of them don't. And I'll explore this in what's coming up. But it's interesting for me to kind of think about which aromas are cannabis aromas, like all of it. And it's too bad hemp isn't in these things too. I wish these landrace guys also collected hemp varieties, because then they would be going out to people who report back, who grow them and go, yeah, it smelled like peppermint, or but I don't get that feedback, but I wish I did. It's I like the whole picture of all cannabis, but hemp's all these fiber hemp things, they have terpenes and they have their own aromas, and they're relatively boring, but in comparison, but they're also different between them. So our Turkish landrace smells different than other stuff I smell, for instance.
Those descriptor terms, I think that's like they're really not a good way to compare, because people mean, like, scent is an orchestra, right? So what one person perceives out of a scent or calls musty is probably different compounds than somebody else calls musty.
Right.
Right. And
And they mean musty or musky. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't know as much you could really learn from it.
But
even
that's where the existence of these clone only varieties that have been shared and have consistent, where we can say, hey, this smells like OG Kush, or this smells like Jack Hare, or this smells like, whatever strain it is, or cultivar, or whatever. And that's I think, when you can use those types of things and descriptor terms, then you can start to talk the same language as someone when you both have the same experience with clone only varieties.
Yeah,
I know Mo and I probably,
it really helps to know the chemical sense. Like yesterday, Rob came by and we had there was an Alfonso mango in the fridge, and these were special mangoes that came from India that David was really into. And like I'd never had one before. I cut it open, and Diana and I split one, and it was like absolute straight up myrcene. Like I've never smelt another mango that had that much myrcene in it. And to the point where I went out and cracked open the terpene myrcene standard here, so you could smell the two of them together, and it's incredibly strong, right? But
his favorite mango.
was it? Yeah, it was. Yeah, kind of generally considered one of the top ones, right? But it's so I went and I looked up the terpene. I looked for a GC of an Alfonso mango, and I screenshotted one paragraph. And if you took out the word mango, like it could have been talking about cannabis, right? Because the terpenes are so similar across the board.
That's why Rob has black pepper and mangoes for breakfast every morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Every morning in Lao, black pepper and mangoes, man.
So, but Fletch, you bring up an interesting point, and I think it's relevant to where cannabis is headed, is it's kind of a seed versus clone in terms of the impact on the gene pool in the market. Because if you look at modern weed, definitely modern seeds, and OG Kush is like the backbone of so much modern cannabis. OG Kush and Chem Dog, right? If you're looking at gas, or you're looking at, what is the modern architecture of the flower, everything, almost everything has those two clone only plants in it. And it's not just because they were good plants, but their impact on breeding was so obvious, right? So you could take that clone only plant, make a cross with it, and boom, you have your own version of OG, your own gas, your own chem, your own sour, right? A lot harder with a lot of to do that with other packs of seeds that you're getting from Amsterdam back in the day, for instance, right? So this move towards clones, and Rob had this great quote in the LA Times years ago when you guys, Ryan, when you did that panel with John Page and Mowgli and Kevin McKiernan, and it was clones equal death, seeds equal life, and the whole audience just cracked up. It was great. It got quoted in LA Times because it was just this narrowing of the gene pool. And I guess what I'm getting at is the question I have is, will we ever get there with seeds? Because we know we can create more uniform seeds, and we know we can breed for more uniform outcomes. But the market so much demands on that, like replicate this over and over, that cookie cutter thing. And then when you have these clone only plants that deliver such a big boom, and it's so difficult to go back to their parents and get that boom. So you just use that backbone beat, to put onto your track. Like, will we ever get to seeds, or is cannabis going to be a clonal crop?
No, it's not, but it depends. I mean, and really, it's not actually, the answer is not that difficult. Fletch and I actually had this conversation online last night without really putting it in these terms. But essentially, there's two things in breeding. There's finding something new, and then there's taking something to the point of stability. Right. And the reason that you take something to the point of stability and uniformity as a seed population is so you can grow it from fucking seed. Right. Because crops are better to grow from seed. I mean, look at all this stuff like broad mites and cyclamen mites and hoplite and viroid. Like those are the consequences of growing an annual crop over decades. How old is OG Kush at this point in time? Right? Like, so the longer a plant lives on, more chance it's going to have to pick up these kinds of viral diseases and long-term problematic pests. So, but if you're growing things from stable that are from seed, you don't get anything new. Right? So it's like there's always, like down in Salinas, there's that one place that grows orchids from seed, right? Everybody else is growing orchids from tissue culture. These guys grow orchids from seed because they're essentially using the fields and the greenhouses to screen massive amounts of plants. And then they take those few interesting new combinations, that whether it's from a chimera or a unique gene combination that they haven't seen before, and they take those things and they send those ones to tissue culture, right? And the rest of the plants just get kind of sold in bulk flower. So those are the two different aspects of breeding. Like, and to me, breeding is taking a known type and putting it into a seed line, or intentionally creating a new type. The benefits that we've had in cannabis, from home growers, and like Fletch was putting up one of these plants the other day where he was using a male plant, and it created a new unique chemotype, or phenotype at least, that had this massively frosty plant. And you can tell us about the scent, Fletch, but that's, to me, that's screening, right? It's what people call pheno hunting. But
Right.
I've said it before on here, to me that's like, it's pheno stumbling. I laughed when you said that, Fletch, yesterday, because it's not a directed approach of targeting something and making selections to going after. It's just growing a lot of plants and seeing what new and special that you find, right? But if once you find that plant, it takes breeding and figuring out the inheritance of these traits so that we understand how to move those traits into new seed lines.
Right. I guess I what I guess what I'm getting at is like how the markets demand. It's not about seeds versus clone in terms of what their benefits are, but will the market continue to want clonal plants because we've created this, for instance, that's why I use OG, this gas craze. And is it, we've never seen, and I hope that this is where we're headed, but I've never seen true breeding seeds that can reproduce the same product year after year, cycle after cycle for one brand who wanted to be, they wanted to have that Coca-Cola, whatever, Big Mac identity. And like, as an industry, is that where, and because cannabis is so diverse, if we move towards true breeding seed lines, will we narrow the gene pool because now it's
they don't need to be true breeding, they just need to produce a uniform crop.
Right, consistent.
Right before David passed, we went and saw that lab, right, in where is it, in Davis, and they were making haploid plants and dihaploid plants, and they were using OG Kush. Like, for example, they were using OG, right? And so the idea, I don't know if that's what they had achieved, but the idea when you're doing that is you bust a plant into its parental chromosome types, and then when you cross those two plants back together, you get back the hybrid, right? So if you had an OG clone, if you had an OG, you'd find pollen, one end plants or haploid plants that represented each of the parental chromosome types, right? So you've essentially busted apart the hybrid, and when you cross those plants back together, you recapitulate OG Kush.
Right.
And so that's what I mean, is like, you can't, and that's not a true breeding plant. It's no more true breeding than OG is, but every single plant is the same.
Right.
Right.
And that shows the importance of keeping those clonal selections. I've always used this example of, like, I'm not a huge Elvis fan, but like this thing of like clones are like Elvis, that every now and then you get a thing that's completely unique from its parents that you can't go back to the parents and achieve something new. And you also can't mate with Fine Priscilla and make new Elvises. So you're always going to be stuck with this. Every now and then you have this one-off moment, and that happens with lots of crops where the value in that clonal selection is greater than anything you can achieve through breeding. So it itself becomes the breeding tool.
Yeah, but the problem, you're right. The problem is that right now, I would say that we have a pretty low standard for what I consider bulletproof plants, right?
Yes.
And other multi-billion-dollar industries, they don't use like flimsy plants. Like, OG's great, a great nose, but man, like you got 3 levels of trellis in these indoor facilities growing it, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's there's weaknesses to these plants. And so that's why like I keep pushing on people like trying to be able to self and understand the inheritance of a given trait so that you can then capture how that trait is inherited and then you can work it into a plant with a better architecture. But that takes
Right.
time. And part of the other thing with the cannabis industry is the market's extremely fickle. New
Yeah.
thing, 3-6 months.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just not realistic with breeding.
Hey, as much as I want to talk about the market, I'm stoked to have Rob here and want to bring it back to some of these
Yeah.
great questions of the
Yeah, I
history
was
and the
just
work
gonna
that he
go to one
did.
of these questions too. I was just looking at those.
Okay, yeah, if you want to answer
Yeah.
one of those, you're welcome to. And
I
then I
saw
have,
one I really like here. It's a question people often have. Do most traditional hash making countries dry the flower in the sun? Well, yes, the answer's to that. Even Afghanistan, they're drying it in the sun. They might even have snow on it some of the times, but yes, it's dried in the sun. And there's a number of functional reasons for that. One thing, you want to get it as dry as you can, as fast as you can, so you can deal with it, even if you're not going to shake off the resin glands yet. These are dry sifting cultures we're talking about, of course. And yeah, you want it. They did it in Morocco too. They did it on hot tin roofs, and when I've seen pictures from Afghanistan, and they lean it against rock walls or something, and just let it bake in the sun. And the other reason is that most people don't realize when you get around to making hashish, you don't want all those monoterpenes. You really don't. It makes for problems. It's made for problems in Nepal with people growing modern varieties. It's made problems in Morocco like crazy. There's the monoterpenes need to go away, and then just have the heavier, denser sesquiterpenes that still stick a piece of hash together just fine. And some of the monoterpenes are so solventy that they actually keep a piece of hash from sticking together. Some of them are like very much like solvents, and some of the monoterpenes are very sticky. But you get rid of the solventy ones over a relatively quick time, and you're left with the more sticky ones. And that's one of the bases to a piece of imported or traditional hash compared to what a lot of people make today, which is technically hash, but it's just different hash. More pure, but different. That's
Fresher,
beautiful.
I guess, would be the best.
Yeah, it's incredibly fresh. I mean, they defreshify it by laying in the sun. They're doing exactly what growers today want to, dry it at exactly the right temperature, or freeze it immediately and work with it as fresh, or admirable things, but completely the opposite point of somebody who's trying to make a piece of something to hang on to over the winter and, smoke a lot.
Yeah, the storage and the handling of it just becomes that's basically this whole piatella craze is basically monoterp heavy hashish that then whatever they call it, nucleates, or I don't know the right terminology for it, but whereas when you don't have all those terpenes, then it'll stay in a nice block for a long time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We always, David and I were always back and forth on why does skunk resin fall apart when you press it? And David was always saying that he thought it was moisture. And in part, I think he was right. But I always argued that it was terpenes. Some of these terpenes are solvent in nature. Limonene, for instance, is used for a solvent. They clean keyboards with it. I mean, it's not a sticky substance. So hashish is all about sticky. It's got to hold together. And I think some of the terpenes can actually dissolve other ones possibly, or solubilize them a little bit. And yeah, I like
I
I
agree.
like hashish in part because it is a piece of hashish. I know that might sound strange, but it makes it very accessible. And whether it's good quality and you smoke it out of pin, or you put it in a pipe or you roll it in a joint or whatever. It's easy to use. That's for sure. It's user friendly.
Yeah. Well, I think we know it's not
Morocco.
moisture. I think we know it's not moisture because we have stuff coming out of the freeze dryers, and that's like, and basically everything turns into a piece of hash. It's just how long does it stay a piece of hash is the real question.
Exactly. No, you press it together and 2 days later, if it's gone whitey, is the term we used to use, it gets white and soft again. And it never goes back together. No matter what you fucking do to it, it's been done to it. That's the other
major. Just a lot of heat till you cook all the terps and everything back
off.
Yeah,
you can go back to just melting it into cooking it.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
It doesn't press back together. It doesn't. It's a one-way reaction when it happens. That's for sure. That's interesting. And it might have to do with water also, though, because some terpenes are hydrophilic. They actually absorb water, especially the monoterpenes.
Right, pulling it from the
alcohols.
It could be pulling it from the air, yeah.
Would be enough to be screwing it up, especially in not a firmly pressed piece, but a piece that's just squeezed together a bit, like in a film can.
I think moisture is a good way to describe it. It's not water, but it's wet, right? The terpenes are they're oils. They're part of the essential oil, right? That's what happens is you're losing the essential oil, and and the cannabinoids are crashing out. You see it happen with dabs, right?
Yeah.
It's like they dry out and they become kind of pasty, but it's really they're kind of hashifying because you're losing terps or volatiles, not just terps. Terps are a big portion of it, but it's other volatiles as well.
Yeah, I've liked looking at the some of the research by Abstracts recently, that company Abstracts, and they work a lot with they're doing, I just signed up to their their newsletter the other day, and I just get bombed with stuff, but they're doing a lot of vape pen fillers and all this kind of stuff, flavorings for those things, but they also work with the hop industry, and it's interesting to see how that's gone kind of two ways. If you look up hop analyses and the way hops are classified, they look at 4 terps.
Yeah.
Okay. They look at caryophyllene and humulene, which is alpha and beta caryophyllene. There you go. They're almost the same molecule to begin with. And they look at farnesene, which it's in cannabis, but not particularly prevalent. And one other one, and recently they added linalool. It was like, okay, now they've got 5 they look at, but there's lots of them in there. But these hop people are also starting to wake up to these hop forward beers. It's a lot about the terpenes and all kinds of other aromatics that cannabis doesn't have, but they're really having to get into that.
We did a whole hops panel at NAPRO. We developed a hops assay, and we're growing hops. We were growing hops down at the Salinas greenhouse.
Well, listen, Rob, if you want to, you'll be welcome. We're going to have the Abstract guys. We've been planning this show for months. We got Nick Ziegler, who did extractions for Yakima Chief hops and did all this sort of analytical work on thiols and different aromatic compounds. The Abstract guys, Dr. Mark, Ryan, Jeremy Plum is going to be on that show. You're welcome to come on if you like. It's going to be a good one.
Oh, I'd love to be on that one. That's good. Is that the guy I met? Mojave and I met with Jeremy at an Emerald Cup one time from Yakima Chief. That I can't remember his name. Is that Nick?
That's Nick. Yeah, we hung out with Nick, and you met TJ and those guys.
No, we were just wondering about him the other day. It'd be really good to see what's up with him for sure.
Yeah, Nick's good.
No, Mojave and I are really interested in the blend of the two, and lots of levels. I mean, all the way from the botany to marketing it. So yeah, it's funny to watch the two kind of come together.
Yeah, well,
we have this a lot of this is related.
Another example of another industry getting influenced by cannabis, right? Like nobody was really seriously looking into that on a commercial level for beer until the cannabis guys started doing it.
Those hazy IPAs.
Yeah.
Be cool. Yeah, no, that's going to be a great show. So we'll be looking forward to that in the near future. Rob, years ago, you sent me a picture And I can't remember where you were, to be honest. And maybe you'll remember, maybe you won't based on this description. But you were like, I don't know if you were just standing under this huge tree or if you were like working in a, I can't remember exactly what you were doing. But there was this tree with like a trunk the size of my waist, and it looked like it was at least 20 feet tall. And when I looked closely, I was like, that's a cannabis plant.
It's huge. Yeah,
Do you remember that plant? That had to be one
yeah,
of the tallest plants.
exactly. That was actually published in one of the hemp journals at one point in an article I wrote. But that was in northern Vietnam.
Right.
And normally they grow plants that they harvest when they're 6 feet tall or a little less, and before they flower, and they get very fine fibers, and they use it for weaving. And then they leave some plants to get seeds so they can sow the fiber crop the next year. And they leave those around the edge usually where the plants branch anyway, so they're not so good for fiber. The inside of once you go in a meter, they use that part of the crop for fiber. So this lady had a plant that she's probably was growing for seed originally, but it was just outside of a window that had a bulb, like a really weak, like 40-watt incandescent bulb. And that plant didn't flower. And it wasn't intentional, it just happened. But I mean, it had a stalk that was seriously, it was 6 inches across at the bottom. It was giant. And that thing was like 20 feet tall. And it was a hell of a bush too.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah,
huge bush.
it was really huge. But that's apparently what happened. Everything else in the neighborhood just flowers and does normal things. And I noticed there was a light bulb there, and I said, "Is that on all the time?" She said, "I turn it on every night." I was like, "Okay, it's probably it." But it wasn't much of a light bulb compared to this massive plant. It was just a little incandescent, glowing, slightly orangey, old-fashioned light bulb. But
Right.
it shows you
Like
don't need much light to stop plants from flowering.
the
Yeah,
ones hanging in the mountains in Colombia.
it goes to show
Yeah.
how light sensitive cannabis is.
Oh,
Exactly.
absolutely. And I would suggest those guys in Columbia could probably get away, most of them, with about a quarter as many lights.
I know they put a
I mean,
lot, don't they?
some of that looks kind of overkill. David and I used to use for every 10 square meters, and these were big plants. These are mother plants to use the next spring, basically in a heated greenhouse, but not heated so they grew it too much. And some of these plants are overhead tall and bushy, but we only used one bulb for every 10 square meters. That's 100 square feet. And it was 40 watts, a blue bulb. They were just 40 watts. Yeah, exactly. We just strung those things up. And the only time we ever got any flowering was occasionally with a male in the shadow, the very bottom short branches that hadn't grown out where they got more light before before the autumn. And they would occasionally, one branch would flower a little bit. It's always a male, but very rarely. And that didn't take hardly any electricity at all. We left them on all night. We didn't break the night, but they were not on all night.
And that's a 7
But it
watt.
worked.
That's a 7-watt LED nowadays too. So yeah, it doesn't take a lot
Yeah,
of light.
that's
Hey, Rob, can you also you mentioned Vietnam, and one of the things that was just so fascinating about meeting you in Amsterdam was like, I met this guy, he's this amazing guy, blah, blah, and then you were gone. And it was always, when's Rob in town? Because you were in China and Vietnam for years, and it was always like a treat when Rob came back from this journey. So talk a little bit about what you did in Vietnam and China over those years, because that was also things that we weren't doing.
No, that was that's where I started really getting into hemp, because I was in Asia and that's the cannabis they do. It's pretty much. So I went first to China. I worked with the Nature Tex group, which was allied to David. It was all part of our group in Amsterdam. And I went there to work with the mill in Shandong to try to maybe grow some Hungarian varieties and see how they would do there. So we sent a bunch of Hungarian seeds there that Bocha had bred. Unico Bay and Compulti hybrid TC, and I think one other thing, and maybe Sageti at that time. And we grew them there and did some things with that. The project fell apart, as so many cannabis related projects do. But we did that for a year. That's what really got me started there. And then later through Hortapharm auspices, really, but financed by Hemparella, Richard Rose originally, and then Donnie Wirtschafter, Ohio Hempery, got in on it, and we worked in Vietnam. That's why I was there. And that was to breed a large seed variety for hulling. That was basically the idea on that one. And we started with, we did two things. David also worked in parallel with the same seeds, but these were large, very large seeds that I collected in Yunnan that were used for snack foods. And I got them from different people in different parts of Yunnan province and grew them all out. They're roughly the same, but there were some small differences, and used those as one side of it and crossed it with Novosadska from Serbia, former Yugoslavia. And that was through Janos Bereni, who's gone now. That was the latest maturing thing we could get that wasn't monoecious. The Ukrainian varieties are all monoecious, and they're also southern ripening for Europe. They're the latest maturing things you can get. They're actually, true hemp, not farm bill hemp and industrial hemp. And we crossed it with that, and that was the beginning of the lines. David selected them in the greenhouse a bit, and I selected them in a number of fields near Hanoi with the Vietnam Agricultural Sciences Institute, and did that for 4 years.
Why that Novosadska variety?
Because it was the latest maturing. Because I was crossing it with the Yunanese, which is almost semi-tropical things.
Okay.
Kind of wanted it for that kind of latitude. And it was the latest maturing dioecious hemp variety. I needed to be low THC also. So yeah, it was a registered hemp variety, the latest maturing. And I didn't want a monoecious. I didn't want to bring monoecious into the picture at all. So
when you say low, you're talking 0.3% THC.
Yeah, the stuff from Yugoslavia was, yeah. And my end product needed to be. So we were breeding it to be able to grow it. No, we've always tried to aim at developing things for the parts of the world where they don't have hemp. And this is another thing we're really lacking. We're lacking subtropical, tropical, lower latitude, closer to the equator varieties. We have weed that grows there, but we don't even really have improved cannabis varieties, sinsemilla varieties that will grow outdoors at those latitudes. That part of the world's lacking, y'all. I mean, on all levels. There's no seed varieties. There's no fiber varieties. There are a few things that have come through that work okay. There's Frog One, independently developed. It's from Yunnan also, stock originally, very low THC, and they use it for a biomass plant in Australia. But not in northern Australia. They do it in, on the mainland, but not, it still has its own band of efficacy, but that's about as close to subtropical as we've got. And we always wanted things that would work in those realms. Cheap labor, big audience. I mean, it's too bad, but cannabis really is a northern temperate crop. And where it's gone more widespread is the drug varieties that have spread more to the equator. But yeah, hemp never made it there. They're really different, very different fish. But yes, as a crop, it's spread far and wide, but different gene pools. Not all of them is spread far and wide. And hemp is quite restricted. So yeah, well, I've always thought there should be a lot of people, French, others have worked on trying to make later maturing varieties. But if you live in Le Mans, it's a little bit difficult to breed things without going to great extreme limits. If you want something for Zimbabwe, you should grow it in Zimbabwe. If you want it for Kenya, you should grow it in Kenya, and develop these things. There just hasn't been the impetus to do it, but there's no reason we can't.
So those,
And when we're talking about diversity, I mean, look at China. My God, they've got 30 degrees of latitude that hemp grows in. They've studied it up the wazoo. So much science coming out of China these days. And they've got all this landrace diversity there, not on the drug side, but I think that's pretty available these days. I don't think they have to worry about that. But they've got a lot of other populations where they can snag beneficial traits and bring them into whatever they're working on. And they have huge diversity there still. And it's just there. It's not, they also have germplasm banks I've just learned about that are fairly extensive. So the next hemp cannabis breeding power, probably in general, but certainly fiber and seed varieties is going to be China. They were really late getting started on modern breeding with cannabis, but they will usurp whatever Europe has done over the years. They're on the next wave.
It's a lot of backyards in China.
Yeah. No, I'm sure they're probably going that way here and there too. But
they're
yeah,
also doing some incredible technology research in cannabis. I saw one. They did a like a overexpression of a gene that resulted in way more flowers per branch. So they're figuring out the actual traits correlated to yield and maximizing them, which is incredibly useful.
Yeah. No, it's all good stuff. And that's but as far as getting back to things we remember from my early days, no. And it's not just that we've lost the plants, so we didn't know how to make cuttings. That's too bad. But we lost the cultures. We lost the reasons that these existed in the first place. Land races they're about the land and they're about the races. They're about their relationships with humans, because nature takes care of part of the selection and humans, farmers, take care of the rest. So that's the thing we're also missing. A lot of these cultures don't have the incentives anymore to do what they used to do, or just became too damn much trouble, or political and therefore cultural changes. So that's, you need for a landrace to remain anywhere similar to what it has been. The environment has to stay fairly stable, but what's been less stable has been the cultural circumstances, the setting, the setting more than the set. So,
and the UN's mandate was to make cannabis illegal, and the United States government was spending hundreds of millions of dollars to get rid of these cultures. So,
absolutely incredible. And they did a lot of damage, but they didn't anywhere near succeed in their goal of exterminating this one. But they did an exceeding amount of damage. There's no doubt about that.
Think of the lost stuff and the things of the past are nostalgia. Like, if you could go back, would we?
Part of what makes it special might be that we can't go back. I used to have this one. It just was so amazing.
Well, one of the things that I think about is, sorry, Rob. One of the things I think about is like as we created the gene pool and we created all this diversity and effect, it was because people were selecting for things. There was selective pressure, right? So that's, to me, the thing that we lost is, to what Rob's saying, it's the culture and it's the why. So why did people choose those chemotypes? Why did people choose those compounds versus what does the market want today? What does the consumer want today? What do companies want? What do seed producers want? And I fear that there's been a divergence there, that the why of the past was the same why for a lot of things in life that they chose. That it's not just nostalgia, it's that we as people are in a different place which is kind of brings to like to the future of cannabis is like where are we headed in terms of chemical diversity, and where does this alignment with people, because prohibition seemed to shape so much of it to get here from that, like with the lack of diversity. And now prohibition's kind of washing away, where now that we have that option again as people to select for what we want. So on that land race, discussion, like, for one, like what is a land race, and how do you create that diversity and segregate it? Because we're now seeing like land race is a marketing tool, right? So I didn't know much about what a land race was, and me and Rob have written about it and we've talked about it a lot, and I don't think we collectively really understand what that word means or what it implies, culturally,
Land race is by definition heterogeneous population of heterozygotes that are used by a culture for a specific purpose, right? So, when you're going in Afghanistan or Pakistan, it was about the hashish. The individual natures of some of the plants didn't really matter so much, right? It was about the use. And, the other easy example, I think, for people to be able to wrap their heads around is Thai stick, right? High intensity light, high humidity. The plants are getting way more than energy than they need for their, for DLI. So thin leaves is the environment is selecting for thin leaves, and airy bud clusters are selecting for lack of mold, right? And those tiny little flowers end up tied onto the stick, right? So it's like it's all for that purpose. But there's no, and this is part of because cannabis again is obligate outcrosser. It's many plants crossing with many plants. You kind of you don't get rid of any genetic diversity, or you don't get any loss of genetic diversity, but you maintain enough variability that there's always like a mixture of different plants, right? It's just as long as they fit the use for the culture, then it fits the type.
Sure.
So Rob, how do you feel about people today in this culture using the word landrace as a branding tool to say maybe that we want weed to be good again? But
yeah, I mean, a landrace to me is Ryan just gave a very good genomic definition of landrace, but a more ethnobotanical definition of it is a plant that has been developed through the interaction of nature and the farmer, essentially, and from the farmer's selections.
Yeah, for you.
The farmer saves his seed every year, and then he sows it the next year. He saves the seed from his best plants, in theory. So that's the basic dynamic between plant and human that keeps it going.
Yeah,
and that's where when cultures change, you lose part of that element. Back to what I was saying there, but it's necessary to have everything as a package, and the essence of culture has also changed. I mean, it's not whatever we had in the 70s was a freeze frame. Those things were evolving at the time. They wouldn't have been the same now anyway, for what other reasons, but that's the way it was at that moment. It's like just watching one frame out of a movie. It's and that's of course where our memories come from.
Well, it's like you're not the same person you were when you were 13.
No, not at all. And our genomes we were born with, cannabis wise, to go back to that analogy, have epigenetic changes by now that we don't relate to cannabis the way we did when we first started smoking it. And the cannabis is different too. So how do you unravel that? It's not easy.
Well, it's also that the very thing that the value of, say, genetic purity, right? Like isolation from external gene pools, which is what I would say part of landrace definition is, that it's been isolated from these other gene pools. The very value we see in that is, let's use that to breed it into other gene pools.
Yeah. we already did the thing is we already did that, right? And like, I remember David telling me this numerous times talking about bringing land races into Hortapharm to grow. It's almost always crap, right? It's
Yeah,
like there's so, like you're essentially going back to undoing all the work that we've done over the last 100 years, right? So I think again, there is a long part of it that's nostalgia. Doesn't mean that we
Sure.
can't get back some of those traits, but
Well, I have a question, and I've kind of experienced doing this myself. Um, what a lot of people's goal, I think, in the market is, or just in general, is to create a new terp profile of their own, whatever that is. That's kind of the unique standout thing you can kind of do at this point, because potency's on every corner at the end of the day. So, um, a lot of all the most of the drug cultivars now are such a small pool of clone onlys, like Mo was talking about, that you don't really find anything new other than candy in candy crosses, So
not when you're
going
random,
to
not when you're randomly crossing plants, but I mean, we
going
showed,
going to
like that
let me
after
just
eight plant.
finish real quick, Ryan. So just going back to like an old land race or something like that, and finding a unique terp profile, let's just say, and maybe the plant kind of sucks or it has no potency, but has one unique smell to it, and you can hybridize that and essentially modernize varieties. Is that an effective method or not? I mean, I've had success doing that myself, but it's not easy work by any means.
Ryan, you want to run with that?
Well, I mean, I think the way most people are crossing plants together, it is just random breeding. And there's a concept in plant breeding called wild type, right? And really, a wild type is like the most common expression of a characteristic, right? That you'd see in the wild. But when you start inbreeding plants, you can move away to the wild type to something else, right? Leaf morphology or scent or flavor. Um, I think I showed through the after eighth and breeding for linalool content that you can take a really targeted approach to changing the chemistry of a plant, right? Or selecting for specific compounds. And really, that's what we were also doing with the NAPRO work, right? It was cannabinoids and terpene chemical signals. Um, I think that's the most effective way. I think the other way is really luck of the draw, right? It's like random whether you are actually going to get where you want to get to, where you think you're going to get to. It's a lot of
Yeah.
it's a lot of
Well, I
crossing
think
your
that
fingers and praying, right? That you're going to get.
I agree. I think the question kind of though is like what you're saying. Let's say you bred your variety to high linalool, right? But maybe the weed doesn't smoke good. So it's great for extraction, but you can't attack the flower market with that per se, right? And I think that's where the qualitative analysis of, at least for flower consumption, plays into selections as well.
Well, that's why it's usually breeders have lines that breed true for the trait they're after, but also breed true for all the traits they're not after, and don't breed true for detrimental ones. So they have lines they understand very well before they start making different crosses between things. And that de-randomizes it a lot. But when people are just throwing one thing and another thing, because this one has this trait and this one has this trait, and trying to get those two traits out of the offspring, what's amazing to me is how many times it's worked.
Well,
I mean, there's something
exactly.
about this plant that those kind of things can work, and things get lost and you never see them again. But especially with flavors, with these aromatic things, to me, it's additive in a way. You tend to keep a lot of them from both sides just when this random approach. Not what Ryan's done, more targeted, but you you keep a lot more than you cut out in when just crossing two things and then smelling the offspring. It's
Yeah, because
and it
there's so many notes involved in the orchestra of scent,
Yeah, there's
right?
so many different compounds. It's
When you cross
Exactly.
two different terpene profiles, you don't get both terpene profiles blended. You get one
no,
or the other. But it's that there's all these other layers of scent molecules that do stack. Like we were talking before about stacking mutations. That's really what you're doing is you're stacking different traits that are related to scent. And that
yeah.
interplay of all those different combinations together is what gives you this different perception of what we call scent, right? But
Mm,
really it's made up of 100 or 50 at least notes, right? And just taking one note away or making it present, like for example, like the thiols, the skunks, or that garlicky kind of note, like that absence or loss of that characteristic plays a big role. Same with the fruity notes, right? Like all the esters, right? It's like you can have whatever given terpene profile, like like the plant that I use is called grapefruit. I mean, it's a terpinolene dominant plant. There's a lot more other terps than just terpinolene, but it is like a terpinolene dominant plant. But the thing that gives it that grapefruit scent is an ester. I'm sure of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Take
Are
the
the
herbal away, the bassoon.
I got a quick question. Do the three different kinds of terps, or do the three different kinds of like trichome heads produce different terpenes inside of them? Or are they all the same?
They've done a little bit of work on this. I think what they've actually showed is that the capped sessile glands are just a different stage of the trichome life cycle from the capitate stalked gland,
Yeah, pretty
right?
much. And
Yeah.
there's
It's
the
not it.
bulbous glands that have different kind of content, and they're a different kind of gland. But yeah, the
That's
Yeah, I
well,
think
that's the
capitate
because
one
they
I was
aren't.
sessile
really
capitate
curious
stalk.
about is
It's about the
bulbous.
stalk. It's not about the head.
Yeah, I think the younger they are, the glands are, the smaller, like the more sessile glands, they're more filled with sesquiterpenes, right?
Yeah,
Or they have a higher ratio of sesquiterpenes.
right, right.
Yeah, they did that visual analysis where they actually tracked the growth on a leaf over time with you know, locating with using AI or whatever, where they locate every gland and then they analyze it over time to show that it was the sessile was turning into a capitate stalk. Yeah.
Oh, I was on
Super.
mute. Sorry about that. You,
So many
Rob, you
different-
spent a ton of time and did a ton of work with David Watson, aka Skunkman Sam, over the years.
Mm.
What are some or one of kind of the, I don't know if I would say the things that you're the proudest of, but maybe the thing that inspired you the most, or the thing that you were really like, this is good work that we're doing right here, because you got to do so much of it.
I thought the inbreeding stuff that ATN was doing to move towards getting single component, single cannabinoid lines, I thought that was good stuff. That was pretty progressive. I like the
Absolutely.
polyploid stuff we did in Hungary as well with skunk. That was interesting stuff. Didn't quite succeed with that.
Was that in Hungary?
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
Bocha's team did all that colchicine and microscope work. And
Oh,
we
I
made
didn't know that. Huh.
yeah, it was all done at Compult.
Did we
Yeah, I
talk
used
about,
to see the world's cross. That was David. You see, we cross up the hemp side of things. You go to the Gate Institute where Compult comes from, Compulti, and you start growing skunk, shitloads of it. But yeah,
Can you
so
tell us about that? So I know, I mean, I've told that story briefly that
yeah.
they essentially contracted Boschke and that institute to grow, what was it, a couple of hectares of skunk? That was the last of the skunk that didn't get used for the color selections in the greenhouses.
Yeah, it's the skunks that yeah, exactly. It was seed that was a bit not in our breeding program so much, but just normal skunk, just different parents. And yeah, we grew quite a lot. We made a lot of hash, which we ended up destroying all of it. But originally it was going to be used as a raw material for a GW type product.
Hmm.
That was
Right. That was because of the company that had the license to produce the extract had
yeah.
legal problems. Wasn't that what happened?
They had extreme legal problems. They had been licensed to work with drug plants and drugs and everything, and I'll leave their name out of it. They're still a company that operates in Hungary. and they got duped. It wasn't their fault, but a Dutch, unfortunately, group of people had ecstasy made and called it something else. And the lab was making it was just making something. They didn't realize what it was actually, and they thought it was a legal compound because they got lied to. And anyway, it all got traced back to them. The Dutch got busted with 300 kilos or something of it. It was very ugly. And that happened after we'd signed the contract, but before they could do extracts for us. And we were a Dutch company, which didn't help. And yeah, they just backed off and went, sorry, guys, we can't do this. But
well, you guys were growing like,
yeah.
2 hectares of cannabis skunk.
We made a lot of it into hash too. So, but yeah, we ended up destroying it as usual. And so, yeah, we've destroyed a lot of very nice weed over the years. That's what breeders do, of course, but other circumstances too.
Well, I'll tell you, it's what I've been doing my whole life. I've been destroying cannabis. I have
Yeah, bit by
destroyed
bit.
every drop of hash I've ever made. I destroyed all the plants I ever grew. I am a destroyer of
Yeah.
cannabis. I'm not ashamed to say it.
Very carefully, every bit of it.
Yes, well,
Thanks to bubble
legally.
bags, all my trash turns to stash.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Who'd have
Because
thought?
like when you're doing hunts, it's like throwing away a lot of stuff. You just keep a top bud and just wash the rest.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's the best way to do it.
Definitely one of the good ways.
What
One
else
of
do
the
you want
many
to share
good
with
ways.
us, Rob? You're working on new books, and what else is going on in life?
Not so much. I'm looking forward to going to California in October. Something I always like to do. Go see what the how the scene's changed and in some ways not changed. But yeah, go enjoy some time with Mojave and other friends. It's a good run. I like to yeah, I like to keep up what's going on. That's my home turf. So
All right,
look
well, I'm
for
gonna bring you guys a couple boxes of jars in October.
yeah, I get to do a little testing. I'm ready for that.
All
You want
right.
to give a little teaser about what your book kind of overview is, or is that off the
Yeah,
top?
it takes off. It started from kind of taking off from marijuana botany because it's over 40 years old and lots happened since then. And yeah, it's about science. It's about it's called cannabis botany, 21st century advances. And I don't know when it'll be out. Don't start looking for it yet. It's a year away probably. But it's about all the cool science that's gone on, not just since in the last 25 years, but since the book was written, and even some things from before that time that I was unaware of at the time. But both sponsored science, shall we call it, universities, institutions, that side, but more importantly, given a nod to all the cool science that's gone on under the radar during Prohibition and post-Prohibition, now that the doors are open and the handcuffs are off. So it's as we've discussed earlier, rapidly developing. There's more and more research papers every day. It's incredible. But what went on to bring us to where we are now is an incredible amount of innovative work and things that went on when you weren't supposed to be touching it. So that to me is a fascinating part of the story, and I think there should be some recognition for that, some little bit of recognition for those who did good science for bad reasons, and it's about science, at the cannabis plant. There's kind of an ulterior motive. Just personally, I would like to see the world shift back more to being empirically based, to having a faith in fact and science rather than faith in leaps of faith, belief in something that's a little more tangible and repeatable, and just personally. So I'd like people to appreciate science a little more. I think we're slipping more into the world of faith and less about the world of fact. So that would be nice. And I think cannabis makes a nice example, and the people who worked with it and around it, that science can be a good thing and used for good reasons. So that's kind of the ulterior motive. I don't know if I'll be successful with that. I'm not a very good narrative writer, but I'll keep working on it. But there's a lot of science in there. That's for damn sure. So yeah, I try to catch people up on things, and as I catch myself up, it's a lot to study these days.
Endless.
Yeah, it's incredible. Keeps me busy all day, every day.
It sounds like a nice journey you're on.
Yeah, it's good. It's always been a nice journey. Mother Cannabis has never let me down. You know, it's we've uh we've gotten a lot of answers to questions over the years, but there's still lots of questions. And that's what keeps you going. The answers are satisfying, but the questions are what drive you onward and keep you going. So there's never any shortage of questions with cannabis.
Oh, I was just going to say, as I think of you and knowing you for all of these years, one of the things we haven't really talked about, which is something that you definitely hold dear to your heart, is textile and the
Oh yeah.
textiles of cannabis. You want to maybe talk a little bit about that? I remember meeting you many, many years ago, and I was lucky enough to get invited to your spot and come there, and you'd show me, you'd have all these cool little like tools for harvesting hemp from different countries from like 100 years ago, and you had all these beautiful textiles from like Laos and different countries as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of your
Yeah,
desire and
yeah,
your love of those things?
for sure. Well, part of my process of moving out away from doing things with cannabis that was dangerous, like in America, and part of moving to Europe was also becoming more interested in hemp. And this group I was with there, David and others, was also working on a hemp company. That's what sent me to China, as I mentioned earlier, and then working in Vietnam. But in China, a bit later on, not too much later on, I started going to Yunnan province, which is not where I went for work originally. I worked in the east, but Shandong. But in Yunnan, there are a lot of ethnic minority people who still grow hemp as they've done for centuries, and that was really fascinating to me. And I started studying and field tripping and going, it's a huge area, and meeting as many people as I could and collecting textiles when I had the chance and taking a lot of photos. And I have the textiles and I have the photos. I'm next book. I promise myself I'll publish all this stuff. I started the book 25 years ago and I wrote the first chapter. I still have all the materials and the collection to continue. It's all sorted and well taken care of, but it needs to be photographed and documented and tied together with the book. But that's all there, and I've built quite a collection. It covers a number of countries, and thanks to you introducing me to Amir, I've also spent a lot of time in Turkey where I collected another immense amount of, especially in weight textiles, because they're rather large rugs that some of them weigh 20 kilos each. So we have uh, we have literally several tons of those. But my collection didn't weigh quite so much and was much more diverse other than that.
Yeah, shout out to Amir. What a great, great human being.
Yeah, yeah.
Glad you mentioned him. I always forget that I introduced you guys and that you guys got me such a beautiful gift for that introduction years later with that Turkish pipe in the big wooden box. Just a
Oh
really
yeah.
I
We
do
were
hold
watching,
that dear for
we were watching
sure.
a video yesterday. I have a video of Amir busting open a watermelon that was growing as a weed in a cannabis field when we were in Morocco. And we were walking through the fields and we found this volunteer watermelon. And so we ripped it out, and Amir took a kind of a hatchet shaped rock and chipped away at the outside of this thing until he could finally rip it open. And we had one of the sweetest watermelons that I've ever tasted, standing under 40-degree sun in the middle of Morocco in a cannabis field. It's a trip.
Yeah,
Beautiful for
that's good
sure.
stuff.
Oh, I had another thing I wanted to mention before I mentioned Amir. Oh, the photos of Laos and all those cultures that you were talking about, that particular culture with the beautiful hemp textiles.
Mm.
That could literally be a photo book. I mean, the photos are so beautiful, and all of those textiles are the patterns on them are just awesome.
Well, this will all end up in books. My partner, I'll splash her out here, name's Gitz Gogland. She's very much the go-to hemp textile expert person. It's amazing that we've ended up linking our lives together. But she's published a book called Cannabis Textiles a couple of years ago, also available on Amazon. And it's really nice. It covers a lot of nice textiles from different cultures and explains a lot about that sort of thing. And she's just launched a website. I don't have the QR code in front of me, but it's called Skoglund Clarke. And there it is. That's Cannabis Textiles. And we'll have more increasing number of hemp things on the site at the moment. Now there's a lot more flax than hemp, and we're just getting it going. She just launched it last week, but there she is. So if people are interested in hemp textile kind of things or textiles in general, I mean, this is a cool site, Skoglund Clarke. So yeah.
Definitely one more cool aspect of cannabis. I can't help but think that we would definitely be in a different place had technology been allowed to thrive in the 30s the way the cotton ginny was. We could probably have seen a lot more hemp textiles. Doesn't seem to be quite as easy as a thing to jump into from a company perspective. Like
no.
It's easier to crack seed and make oil. That's like good low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
You probably won't go bankrupt.
And it was an easy Ryan and I were talking about this yesterday, but it was an easy transition to growing hemp seed. Once you had fanola, and fanola started it all. Then you had a short plant to produce plenty of seeds, matured early, and you can harvest it. That's the key thing with a normal grain header. Anything you can harvest rapeseed with in case of Canada. I mean, you could also harvest by driving a bit slower mostly, but with very few modifications, really covering a few bearings and things and just taking it easy. You could use your normal stuff that almost every farmer had or could borrow. So switching over, it wasn't difficult. Hemp fiber processing equipment is super expensive. There's ways to harvest without fancy equipment, but there's a lot of compromises there. So it really would take a lot of money to revitalize that. So hemp companies, of course, they use the limited sources, which is essentially China these days. A lot of cheating goes on in the hemp textile business. If anybody out there is in the hemp textile business, be very careful who you buy from. But China still produces, not that all of it's good, but they still produce really good hemp cloth. And Romania and some of the other suppliers have really slipped way down the path or off the track entirely. So yeah, that's all really declined quite a bit. But I don't know that anyone's ever going to really bring back hemp textile manufacture. It could be blended in with other things and become vital in some other way, but on its own, I don't know. I think we're stuck with what we've got and maybe modernizing that a bit, but I don't see any new players popping in and trying to do this. It's just too many millions of dollars.
Yeah, maybe even more.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely millions, but just how many? But yeah. There's also a lack of new technology. I mean, that's kind of spending all that money to basically still do it the way people have always done it. And the flax industry hasn't done anything really new and different either in all these years. So there isn't any tech to borrow from particularly that's more advanced, and people haven't really come up with anything very new. They've tried this green decortication where you don't have to dry the stalks and decorticate the stalks and get the bark. You can just peel the bark off in the field. But then what do you do with it? I mean, it's harder to dry process a bunch of green bark strips than it is stalks. At least you can tie them in bundles, store them in the barn till you want to use them. Now, there's really problems with the whole. There's a chain, but the links are not very well connected.
What if we ban cotton farming? What if we ban cotton farming? Then what? What about hemp textiles?
Well, yeah. Then I guess for your cellulosic fibers, you'd be needing them again. But yeah,
cotton is the worst polluter of pesticides in the world. So, if the EPA cared about people, We'd have
Clearly they
all hell
don't.
closed by mandate from the government.
Yeah, but think of all the chemicals that went into cotton, as bad as they were, and leaching into people's
Still is.
bodies. Now they've like, well, actually, we've stepped it up because now we're not really fucking with the cotton as much as we're fucking with the forever chemicals in the plastic clothing.
Right.
Oy, oy,
Oil
oy.
clothes.
Yeah, oil clothes.
And we got
Yes,
biotech.
sir.
Oil rags. Living in oil rags.
I had a couple more questions about hashish because I haven't heard as much as I kind of wanted to, like how soon, timeline wise, after kind of botany was done and on the shelves, book release party, how many years later are you starting to think about the idea of doing this book, Hashish?
One moment, I was just distracted. I got to switch over to the house,
Internet?
the house Wi-Fi here. So just let me
Sure.
do that.
No
I might
problem.
actually shift positions, but give me just a moment.
This might be a good time for me to take a big dab, actually.
Someone cue the girl from Ipanema.
The girl from Ipanema. Oh yeah. Nice hash church. I like these small panels. I'm loving hearing all these stories from Rob. The audience
There
is
you go.
loving
You're
it.
back. All
We've
right.
had 400 people in here. So yeah, I guess I got to ask that question again in regards to hashish, which was how soon after you had done marijuana botany, that's released, it's on the shelves. Before you start, and could be decades, years, I don't know. How long before you start thinking about this concept or this desire to write a book about hashish?
Oh, it was really kick-started by. Yeah, I just got back on. Good. You want to bring me a beer? You want to bring me a beer while you're out here? That'd be great, man. Thanks. Super good.
It's
Yeah,
not
I know
Good
what-
friends.
We're in
Yeah,
Europe.
yeah.
That's a real friend right there.
Yeah,
Did
yeah,
you
for
change the
sure.
Wi-Fi? Yes, I will bring you a beer, Rob. So good.
Yeah, we're still in contact here. No, it's when I moved to Amsterdam, and that was 87 or whatever. So 6 years later, something like that. So
Okay.
yeah, that it really was kickstarted by being in Amsterdam. It didn't take very long, but I was just suddenly surrounded by hash guys. I mean, gee whiz, these names won't be mentioned, but we used to go to this guy's houseboat. Okay. A houseboat that hadn't been made into a house. It was just a barge pretty much. He lived in one end of it, but he'd open up the top of it like you do to bulk load these barges. And we would sit all night long with Afghan hubble bubbles and fresh fruit and no beer, no alcohol at all. It was just a strictly no weed, just Afghan hash mostly and some other nice pieces. And somebody asked what was my favorite hash. I mean, really, they're all different, and really good ones from any country could be your favorite. I mean, a really good Lebanese is fantastic. Really good Afghan was great. All these were rare, even back in the day. By the time I got involved, they were not around so much. Turkish was almost finished, but I liked the little bits I got a chance to try. Not very strong, but really nice. Elevating kind of thing. But yeah, if it's of good enough quality, hashish from anywhere is really nice. The best piece I smoked recently, I'll give a little shout. I almost forgot, but oh, thank you, sir. Fantastic. All right. Nice.
Just in time to tell us about the best piece that you had recently.
Best piece I've had recently. It was in this wonderful place that everybody's heard about for cannabis for years, Thailand. And it was just very recently. Cheers. And it was from the India Landrace Exchange guys, Trident Seeds. It was from their variety they had developed from 4 land races they'd collected, made hybrids, and then made a 4-way from that. And it's really nice weed. It's nice weed to begin with, quite different from the things we normally have, but very nice, Cincy. And then they made just traditionally made sieved hash from it, the kind that has just enough particles in it that you can stretch it when it's warm and then you twitch it real fast and it snaps. That kind of texture, you know, but it still doesn't melt, so it's unmanageable. You can still stick it on a pin and make a little snake and put it on a pin, and it'll still carry a coal like a piece of incense. You know, it's manageable. And I really appreciate that. You can actually do it on a pin under a glass with a coaster. Very discreet. But it was a beautiful thing to smoke. It was super nice. It had a really nice high, special high, and there's one quarter of it was an Afghan selection, but all the rest of it's narrow leaf stuff from various Indian and other backgrounds.
I got
But, yeah,
Shout out to
that was real special. It was just traditional, like I like, and knew all this. It was just had everything.
Where did the pin, and the glass and the coaster technique come from?
God, I have no idea. I saw that so many years ago. It's always the discreet way. It still is the discreet way to travel. Yeah. The only thing you got your piece, and you got no paraphernalia. I mean, everybody has a sewing kit, and if you have a stack of odd beer coasters, you're a beer coaster collector. I mean, it's pretty
I've used
pretty
it.
good.
I've used it quite a few places.
I felt the same way about the stainless steel screen. You know, that's all I would carry. Then I'd just be like, pop it into an apple, go make some hash, drop that hash in there.
A classic toilet paper tube, the dookie doot.
The dookie doo. Yeah, that's the 747 special.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you got places like Amsterdam where you never had to be that discreet. You just had to be polite. And I always think there's a lot of mileage out of being polite, especially when you're kind of being an outlaw. But yeah, in California was a great place to grow up. It's tolerated and now legalized, and I've been lucky. You know, there's a lot of people in the world who still live in places where it's hard to get away with doing what you want to do.
So what did you think after, I'm sure it had been some years before you were hanging out on barges with like no, big openings and hubbly bubbly pipes, and sort of experiencing these different hashish cultures. I'd love to hear what it was like in your words to experience the first legends of hashish at Simone's restaurant there, the Artiste.
Yeah, that was the thing. That was a bit of that Hubble Bubble, Afghan Hubble Bubble vibe. That was some of the same people. I was interested again because it was so many different people from so many different places. It was your friends who I'd never met, a lot of them,
Right.
and people we knew. You'd probably not met all of them either, and it wasn't that many people. It was great. People were really into it.
Yeah.
I mean, more into the whole idea of hashish. I mean, I've been around weed people who are enthusiastic about contests and things for years. I mean, since California days. But yeah, it was interesting to see that this traditional thing had some fire left in it. The people were really interested in the concept.
Well, they were
Water
interested in
revolutionized it, of course. I mean, that was the thing. And then,
absolutely. It's the thing that opened the door to the people that I brought to that party. But the majority of those people came to Legends to meet you and Dave. They wanted to be around you and Dave. That's what they wanted to be. Like you were the ones that had been sort of teaching them and kind of putting a spotlight on some of these hashish cultures and stories and concepts and the book itself. I mean, listen, there was definitely more than 2/3 of the people that I invited to Legends went to meet you two for sure. And to be exposed to the hubbly bubblies, like, that was special. Those were, to me, those were like heirloom pipes, they were
yeah,
special.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They were
really
real
special.
Afghan stand-up water pipes. If you just to let everybody know what they were, the ones with straight sticks and a straight bowl, and you stand up to smoke it. Big water jug, yard tall sometimes, and you go through a lot of hash in one of those. My God, you get huge hits. There's, yeah, remember that Danish guy you brought that time and his lady? Oh my God.
Hash bean.
Hash bean, Mr. Lungs, man, incredible. But
Yeah.
yeah, you can really, if you want it, you can get a huge hit. You kind of hyperventilate is the idea. You take in a hit, you blow it out through your nose, you take another one, you get totally saturated.
I
And you
remember
can get
one year.
incredibly high that way. It's a tool
Oh,
that works. And you just go
listen.
through an incredible amount of hash.
Well,
And once it's going real good, then people would throw in good sized pieces and it would just stay going until the last man or woman standing.
yeah, it was a true room full of aficionados. I'll never forget Debbie Goldsberry one year leaving after like an hour, and she's like, "I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry that I used a ticket. I'll never try to come to this party again." And for me, I stood out front and pretty much whiteyed with almost every single person that ever went to that event. I would see someone come out just white because it didn't have the greatest like HVAC system for clearing air. It was a
No,
small
it didn't.
roof, tiny little
It's
Dutch
a
restaurant, and
top
oh
floor of a tiny restaurant with a really low roof. It was, yeah.
yeah, holy would it get smoky in there, like
I
absolutely
remember other
insane.
patrons asking to open the window.
Yeah.
Right.
I wish
Yeah,
I
we used
had a
to go in there
too.
and smoke on non-legends events. I mean, the
Yeah.
owner's wife was a smoker and they were Lebanese and she didn't give a fuck. So I've a couple of times people would complain because the horror cup, people used to smoke cigarettes in restaurants here when I came,
Ugh.
right? And the restaurant union put an end to that. But they did not stipulate anything about cannabis. So cannabis was and still is the decision of the owner. It's not the decision of the restaurant union. So owners, very few of them, but a few, there was an Indian restaurant we went to too. They let you smoke. And if somebody said, well, what do they do? And I want to smoke cigarettes, or they said, no, you can't smoke cigarettes, but they're smoking. Yes, they're smoking ganja or they're smoking hashish. They're not smoking cigarettes, but only two restaurants I knew went that distance. There's a bar downtown. He's still there too, Peter. Philip. He solved it a different way. He said you could bring your glass pipes and smoke those in my bar because nobody smokes tobacco in a glass pipe. And I'm not going to go and ask people what they're rolling every time.
Right. Right.
So that was his solution. I thought that was so brilliant, so practical. It's like, yeah, bring your glass pieces, whatever. But
Oh my God. Diana just pointed out something hilarious, and I forgot about this, but I remember the wives in the back, of the original Legends deep in on the back row against the wall, and how they would deal with like it was like being in a house fire, honestly. Like there was no difference. This was like being in a house fire once that hubbly bubbly got lit up. And Diana just reminded me, she goes, we couldn't open the windows because of the neighbors, right? Because we rent out the whole restaurant and do this major hash aficionado evening. And there was no illegal sales or anything like that. We were just hashish aficionados, adults being allowed to smoke hashish in this venue. And yeah, God bless them for allowing it. They were really cool, Rob. They were cool people.
They're great. And the food was amazing too. That
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
So
I was always happy about it. Listen, I'll never forget those nights. To me, like I said, no one went for it to be a competition because it was never considered a competition initially. Dave turned it into a competition at the first event when he was like, I want to see everybody's hash. And everyone was like, I'm going to show Dave Watson my hash.
Yeah.
Everyone just started putting hash in front of him. And then it became a thing. And I remember I kind of fought that for a bit. I was like, it's not a contest. Like, this is just about our love of hashish. And then I thought, you know what? Legends is bigger than any of us. Let Legends be what Legends is. And very much so, people love to flex and they love to show the great hash. And I love the idea of people bringing great hash and paying homage to the sort of giants whose shoulders they now stand upon, to be able to be like, here's a piece, like check this out in a wonderful atmosphere like Amsterdam, where back then you could do that without feeling like a bloody criminal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful times.
soon as we got past customs, we no longer felt like grown up.
Yeah, exactly. Even though the first cannabis cup ever that I went to was at the PAX Party House and it was right next to a police station, and I was just like, are you kidding me? This is not real.
Yeah.
And I'm Canadian. My American friends could not wrap their heads around it way worse than I couldn't wrap my. I was just like, after a while, I was like, okay. But for 10 days, they were like, no.
Dude, I would walk around just looking for camera crews and people with cameras and try to get out of the lens. That was the whole thing. That was my big freak out. Everyone was so open in Amsterdam, but I was never that open.
Yeah.
But I tell you, speaking of legends, I have been to many events with Rob, and every now and then we get these guys coming up that you could, it's almost like it was a pilgrimage, like they're holding either like holding the book or they're like, waiting for Rob to sign something, and their eyes are like, Rob Clarke is here right now, at Emerald Cup or somewhere like that. So I just have to say, you are, to many of us, a true legend, man.
Well, thank you. I didn't ever think I'd be in any position like this, but the plant brought me wherever I am. So let's thank the plant for that.
Hell yeah. You remind me of Paul Stamets when you say that, Rob. Because the first time I saw Paul speak, and everyone in front of him was like Jonathan Ott from Yale, and like all these like psychedelic dudes that were from Harvard and all these prestigious universities, and they'd be like, I'm from Harvard University. And then Paul Stamets gets up on the podium and he's just like humble dude. He's just like, I just learned everything I learned from the mushroom. And I'm just like, ain't that the fucking truth? And I know you've had some experiences with Paul over the years. You guys are friends.
Yeah. Haven't seen him for a long time, but yeah, for sure.
Now you got to show up at his place and he'll put you to work again.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I'm sure he's doing well.
Rest for the wicked.
Boy, his pictures of Morocco. Look at that, man. It's like you'd think they didn't grow anything else, which they don't.
It was really the first place that I'd seen cannabis grown on that scale in rows.
Amazing. I mean,
there's that was Manitoba
tree or something sticking up there, but yeah, amazing.
It must take a lot of water.
They don't have enough either. That's the big issue. They fight over water, but it's not the Roof Mountains are not a place that's blessed with water. It's really quite arid. And that's one reason. There's Amir with his water.
Yeah, here's Amir with the watermelon. Let me
look. You have the video there.
Yeah, but this is what they do
for water.
They build these massive, and like they've had a few of them break, and they take out like, I mean that's a truck over there, right? Or it's not in that picture, but these are like almost Olympic-sized swimming pools. So if they give way, like it's a really problem. So here's a mirror. We found this watermelon field.
Mirror.
Which one is it? Must be this one.
There's two of them that are videos. So yeah.
There we go.
Amir's gonna crack that bad boy. Just bang it on the rock, Amir. You got this. Bang it harder. Oh, he's going for the straight like baller. I lift weights method. Look at that.
Perfect, man. Perfect split.
Yeah,
it was the sweetest watermelon I've ever tasted. One of the things I love from here is like, I remember someone saying, well, where's the property line? And he was like, oh, it's where the variety changes.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
And these look, you see fields like this, they look like clones. These are all female seeds. But
I think this is where we saw those plants that looked like panorama, Rob. I think they're coming.
Yeah. Yep, there you go. Little squatty guys.
Yeah, there's some in this field. They were really
some little off types. That was an off type you saw. And also about 1 in 1,000 plants was a female gross phenotype, 100% male. Got a flower top.
There's the panorama plants.
Yep, there you go. Little tumbleweeds.
The males were back in that first
Funny
section.
little, even in these
Yeah, they are.
inbred homogenous populations. There's a male. There you go. Like, look at that sucker. That's a male with capital M.
Just ready to pollinate 8 trillion cannabis plants.
Yeah, I mean, they get seeded anyway. I mean, they're not trying to make seedless weed, but
No.
Yeah, those males that pop out are funny. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but there they are.
All these different hash producing countries that you've been to in your life, do you have a kind of favorite, or do you just have an appreciation for all of them in their own way?
No, I haven't visited that many really, but yeah, I think Nepal's the most beautiful. I mean, from my point of view. But yeah, Morocco's kind of a nouveau thing. I quite enjoyed going to Morocco 30 years ago. And it was there, or a bit more, when it was still just the keef plants and they hadn't grown anything modern yet. None of it, zero. But that hashish was better too. I mean, that was the unique Moroccan hash. Now Moroccan hash is just like modern hash made from modern weed. So it's not anything special anymore. But the old varieties I really liked. They had a different high. They were not so potent for one thing, but they had a really nice high.
Isn't it interesting? The plants are the same as the
flavor.
humans. Sorry, go ahead.
Really good stuff. But that quickly went away. That genetics is swamped.
We never seem to see the value of authenticity, like what something is, in regards to even people. Like, people are always, when you're authentic, you're always the most liked, just be your authentic self. That's the best version you can be of yourself. And I guess we're always trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. There's the tat, 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 tat.
There you go.
Some serious farmer's grade sift going down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that technique is same thing they did 30 years ago. It's no different.
Wow.
The sieve, the actual sieve surface that is underneath that is nylon, I suppose, or some other synthetic. It's just a woman's scarf. You see a black thingy just pulled off of there.
Right.
They stretch it real tight, and so the hole size, the pore size in these sieve cloths varies constantly. I mean, it's really, yeah, this is really not.
They should try pantyhose.
Reproducible extraction. Yeah, if they were big enough, they would. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, you got to get those. You got to buy them in like Middle America.
Yeah, I don't know if pantyhose are a big thing in Morocco.
No, you got to go to like Minnesota and buy the extra large ones and then bring them to Morocco.
There you go.
I'm just being silly. But yeah, that is wild to see that. This is the country that produces probably still to this day the most hash for export, going by miles.
Yep, they do.
And I can imagine back in the day, that sieve, that fabric must have been, like your family treasure. Like if you had a source of like this one thing that worked for you season after season, didn't break down, you either had these pieces that you used over and over again or a stack or one holy cloth. But if you think, because in my early hash making days, finding the right material, the right screen, the right size, the right pour size, the right thread count, mono versus poly, all that shit, it was a lot to figure out. And if grandpa just pulled out like this is what we use, and like that's got to be it.
One of the charts of the back of the hashish book that's the most useful is the pore size in microns, the pore size in millimeters, and the different brands and the numbers they sold the different pore sizes under. Because some brands, the brand ABC number 72 is because it had 72 pore size. Yeah, this size thing. But there's also a table in the back that has all the. Yeah, there you go. It's got all the.
Listen, this is Rob. I posted this a picture of this out of the book in 2009, and I'm telling you, this thing has been looked at over 1 million times. This is but listen, Micron and LPI are completely in the opposite direction of one another when it comes to hash. Popularizing and learning about water hash, you know about Micron. You want to start learning about dry sift? Well, you better not try my dry sifting over a 70 micron screen. It's 70, you need to understand the difference between LPI and microns. And this simple conversion chart, dude, has helped me help thousands of people. The minute you started mentioning it, I was like, I'm going to go post this right away. The conversion chart for lines per inch to micron. And I think LPI and mesh are the same, correct? MESH, capital letter mesh.
Yes, I think they are. Yeah, it's
so.
just European versus American system or something like that.
You even added inches and millimeters. Like that is a good. Here, you know what the first person said? The first person that wrote, like in this post about this, he chose the name Hieronymus Bosch. He said, Rob knows way too much. When was this book written? The 70s? Definitely a pioneer. Thank you for posting this. People are stoked on that, man. Your book is packed. This is like one small picture in your book.
Yeah, it's dense. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why it takes so long to write books, I guess, but we'll see about this next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it'll be a keeper 40 years later. That's a good sort of second chapter.
This was a pretty field. This was my favorite one on this whole trip, I think.
Yeah, it's already my favorite one.
This
It
place
doesn't look as starved.
This place had water flowing right through it.
It looks like it.
This you can't tell from this picture, but there was a point where the water came out of the mountain, so they diverted the water as far sideways on either side as they could, and it was cannabis everywhere, right? And they had a guy on this mountain face. I think you can see him here, and he was rappelling down the mountain face or the rock face, yanking out plants and throwing them over his shoulder. And they had this guy down on a horse or a mule or whatever it was, collecting the plants, and they had literally every square foot in this valley where they could get the water to. They were growing weed, and these other trucks were pulling up with containers and harvesting water for their own farms. And yeah, you'll see. It's quite a field. He called it the Green Valley.
Really a magic spot.
Yeah, well, and you can see how dry it is everywhere else, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And
oh my God, it's the emerald in the cut. It's probably got all the neighbors' attention.
Well, what got all the
knows what's going on. That's the road to the coast from there. That's like it doesn't look like it, but it's actually the major road.
Wow. This was a secondary road. This one was.
Yeah. It wasn't the highway, but it's still a through road all the way to.
Yeah, it was a through road. Yeah, if you were brave. But yeah, see, there's the guys on the rope.
Oh yeah.
And this was all like this had all been harvested that day, and they were working their way down to this next section on the left. And it was all very near the mosque, which I think comes up pretty soon.
We have 30 minutes left, 28 minutes left in this episode. So if there's anything, Rob, you want us to cover in the last 20 or so minutes here, or if you want to check out any of the other questions that have been asked, or really whatever you like, man. I love the stories. I love the pictures, but I just want to give you the heads up that we have, we've done 3.5 hours and people have been loving it.
That's good. I'm amazed that people can hang in like that. That's good.
Yeah.
Questions wise, this is a tough one, but I'll tackle it anyway. What does Rob think will be the next hash breakthrough? And then some possibilities: extraction techniques, new genetics for hash. There you go. Consumption techniques. What does 2050 look like? I don't know. Consumption techniques, I think we've really come a long way. I don't know. I'm not missing anything. Extraction techniques. I'm into concentrates, not extracts, basically, and just for clarification, extracts are concentrates, okay, but not all concentrates are extracts. Concentrates to me are, as the term implies, concentrating the active ingredient, which really means removing the stuff that you don't want. But when it's done mechanically without solvents, that's the form of concentration that I call hashish. Okay, and it can be rosin. I mean, that's just a real modern hashish making technique, but it's not BHO or ethanol extracts. So those are extracts. Okay, those are chemically done, and that's where I make the separation. And some people don't really follow that, but that's the way I distinguish the two. So extraction techniques, concentrating techniques. Well, we've gone pretty far with that too. We can't really make it any more pure than it already is. But genetics, that's a big thing for the future. I mean, that's the plant breeding coming in. Genetics about having plants that dry sift better or wash better, that could be part of it. Plants that just give up their resin more easily. I know a lot of our hash varieties came from Afghanistan, and there a lot of the resin's on the leaves, but the rock bud we got from breeding with Afghan also is not conducive to making hashish. So maybe we could have different flower forms that were more helpful in the big process, getting the resin off easier without breaking up the plant material so much. But I think it's more about making it easy and also having hashish that's different flavors and different highs, especially having varieties you can make hashish from that are not that are more of the narrow leaf drug sort of types that are not particularly high resin yielders, but maybe there's an economic scenario where people desire them enough that they still work. Haze hashish. Okay, well, you better come up with a haze that dumps a little more resin than the ones we have today, but I think that would be fantastic. So I think breeding is going to come in a lot. That'll be the next hash breakthrough. Will be more dedicated varieties really for making hashish.
Definitely agree. You're on that point. We can't purify any better. We can only purify faster. That's the only last vestige of the purification of gland heads. It's like we've been doing it like it hasn't even gotten better since we were doing it with cake mixers in the 90s.
No,
And
no,
so
and there's no it hasn't been automated. And people have tried, but like you say, that just makes it happen faster, which could make it cheaper in the end. But
yeah, we're still pulling
it's getting
bags.
cheaper anyway for other reasons. So yeah.
Even with our Whistler technology equipment, with the only one person, it's not automated completely. You're operating it. You're collecting the hash. You're putting it into the freeze dryer. It's more automated than it's been in the past, but certainly not and really water hash and static sift. We've had water hash in the late 90s. Then rosin came out, which was a big one because rosin, different than static sift and bubble hash, because those really shine the best with the best material. But if it's mediocre, the hash or the sift will look very mediocre. Whereas rosin was what you could do with those two mediocre products and then turn it into a dabbable product. So that was a very big sort of evolution in cannabis
Dabs
extracts and
without
concentrates.
solvents. That's where you went from extracting to concentrating without solvents and without really extracting. So that to me was a big leap. It's why deal with the solvent thing when you can get a equal thing as far as being able to use it in dab rigs or whatever, and that's fantastic.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, other questions here? think we kind of answered that one.
Rob Carroll asked if you were the artist behind the images in Marijuana Botany.
Yeah.
Most of them, yeah. Not all of them. Some of them came from a British artist, and 4 of them came from somebody in the Bay Area. But yeah, I did most of them. And they were just like, I'm not a good freehand botanist, a botanical artist guy, but those are done pretty much by a technique called camera lucida. It was done a long time ago. It's if anybody's old enough to remember, back in school days, they had overhead projectors, and those work with a transparency, but they had opaque projectors. Remember those? You could open a book and put it underneath, and it broadcasted not that bright, but you could see it on the wall. And if the room was dark enough, it worked pretty good. Well, I had a lot of photos because I used to take slides, and often I'd have a photo that wasn't such a good slide to reproduce, but I would put it on the wall, and with a fairly large piece of paper, maybe 3 feet high sometimes, I would pencil outline the photo, the image that's in the photo, and then sharpen it up essentially by taking the pencil drawing and then inking it. And that's how I did, and then shrinking them down so they look pretty detailed. Shrinking them more than is recommended for shrinking botanical prints, actually. But I went ahead and did it, and it worked. It was kind of interesting. And I'll put some of those in the new book too, the ones I like the best. But yeah, most of those are mine. And yeah, I wish I'd done more of it, but that's how I did it. I'm not a particularly brilliant illustrator. Anybody can do this, actually. That's a little trick I just taught you. One thing photos often don't have is depth of field, even with modern fancy cameras and things. That these young guys that have the fancy rigs, they create depth of field by moving the camera, or moving the focal plane. But back in the day, you could take a generally pretty fuzzy photo, which we had a lot of, and make a sharp drawing. That was the real reason for doing it.
Very cool. We have she's no longer with us, but this woman, Mary Comer Miles. She was born in 1933. She used to be my neighbor, and I didn't know this for a long time. And when I finally learned about it, because this woman was always home, and she'd always like have her little Etzel set up in her beautiful little perfect forest grove garden, and she's a botanical artist. And you can check her out online. Yeah, Mary's super plant paintings, really awesome. But that's cool. There's even another dimension to how you created those pictures, that you photographed them first and then you did the hand drawing. So that's even more like a personal connection to those photos.
Probably had to develop the photos yourself as well, out of fear of busted.
Wasn't quite that crazy, but yeah.
Dude, I was terrified to send photos in the 80s and 90s anywhere. It was like a guarantee that you would get busted if you took pictures of weed and sent them in to get developed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just a bummer.
By that point, I'd stopped taking photos for quite a while, actually. But yeah.
Wow.
Someone in the chat asked for a picture of me with before I had lost my hair. So
oh my God.
Stop.
That's what you look like when I met you.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is exactly what you looked like when I met you, dude. That is fucking awesome. I love that. Here's one of us, Rob, from years ago. I showed this a couple weeks ago in Hash Church. This was us walking to my my room at the Krasnopolsky, and we came across all that ice. And so I don't know who the third person was. It might have been Hashbean that took that picture of you and me, Rob.
There we go.
Yeah, classic old photo.
Another
I love
question.
the old photos.
Somebody wanted to know if the man in the Indians cap with charas on his hands. That's charas on his hands, yeah. No, it's not Sandy Weinstein, though. Sorry. No, that's a guy named Jimbo. But
oh yeah, Jimbo. Classic. Cheating it. Well, what a wonderful, wonderful episode today. I'm looking forward to seeing how well received this one will be. We had a lot of people watching for the last 4 hours, and shout out to all of you who are in the chat room right now. Organic Farming, OG Brick, Bingo Lombardi for holding it down. Thank you to the Press Club and Puffco for their support as always.
Rob, I got to tell you, we all love you very much, man. You make a huge impact on all of our lives and in the community, and you're one of the people that like everybody just loves you. So,
Oh wow, thanks. That's
you're an important person in our community, not only in the
we
moment,
didn't get
but
the Pollyanna story.
oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going down this list here. Some good questions here. I couldn't get to everything, but yeah, the Pollyanna story. Pollyanna was grown in 1978, 77. There was a plant called Polly that was Colombian, as I remember, and it was a creeper. There's a drawing from it in the book, not particularly stunning drawing, but it was one of these plants that just came out and had a long main stalk, and it just came out with branches and immediately went down and all the way to the ground, then turned up. So all the branches for up like 4 feet or more all came all the way down to the ground. And an offspring from that, I don't know what the parent would have been. There was an accidental seed in this person's garden, but it was an upright form, very upright. And that's what Pollyanna was, actually. And seeds from that were also some random pollination, but then it went from there as an inline breed with half sibling crosses and became Pollyanna, which wasn't really ever a stabilized thing, but it went on to be part of other things like early pearl. That's where it really moved on.
Early Pearl, that's right. Early Girl and Early Pearl. Was that was your work,
Yeah.
wasn't that, Paul?
Early pearl was early girl was somebody else's. It was named after the tomato, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, I crossed it with Pollyanna and made early pearl, which went to Neville, and he sold it to people. And I hardly ever saw it again. Somebody mentioned it the other day to me. Where was it? It was just in the last couple of months, and I was surprised to hear anybody still had one. But when I got to New Zealand years and years ago, that was the thing that was early enough, and that's a lot of the bush growers had grown it. And then suddenly there's this return of early pearl in my life years later. And there I am seeing it again.
Well, didn't early pearl got used by Cincy in quite a few things that got used
It
in other
did.
things?
It did. It was part of
in
some of
the
those processes. It
Silver
was early.
Pearl.
Silver pearl. That was one.
pearl, absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. And it was yeah, that was back in the day when people didn't really cover up what they were doing so much. It was like the names were still are not that innovative a lot of times, but the name would be a hybrid name for the hybrid cross that was made. It's kind of cute.
Someone here is smoking a 20-year-old Silver Pearl clone right now. Buckshot Hill.
All right.
Of
Well, I mean,
course
that,
he is.
that was when stuff was actually exotic. I mean, you were talking about an exotic country, where it came from and what a hybrid of it was before we started really branding weed. It was place of
Yeah.
origin.
Yeah, for sure. And all those like the stuff I did, the What's in a Name that I wrote that came out in 2000, I guess, in Jason King's first Cano Bible. And that all that information comes from published seed catalogs, all of them pretty much that were available. And people just said what it was. It was a South African Khyber Pass cross they sold. That's because it had a South African and Khyber Pass parents, and went on like that for a long time. It got a little complicated. There'd be 4 things listed in a variety name sometimes, but I mean, when skunk came around, for instance, it had a name besides Afghan hybrid something or other, then yeah, maybe that's sort of what started a lot of the branding. Was it wasn't just the name of where it came from.
Yeah, because all the
Things like
SFC
that.
catalogs were like M39 and just letters and numbers kind of for the catalog name. And then all the early Neville stuff was usually, like you're saying, place of origin hybrids.
SSC was too.
Not
The
all,
first
but
or if they gave it a number or something, they still said what was in it underneath.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. And some things got names and some things didn't, but it wasn't commonplace yet, even by that point.
and even if it went by a name, it probably was the same name from somebody else instead of the names being changed to protect the guilty. But
Organic Farming says, I remember coming across his book Marijuana Botany in 89-90 in my elementary school library. Of
right
all,
on.
I was
Good
in
librarian.
Right?
He was in
Dude,
kindergarten, first grade.
When
that is amazing.
when I was 15, before I even started smoking weed, I would go to Barnes and Noble and go like read the weed books, Marijuana Botany being one of them. Just like reading it because I'm like, well, there was only so much information. This is like 2000 probably. There's only so much information you could get on the internet, and really, books were still a much more condensed place to learn, and that was yeah. I mean, this book, I think I bought this when I was like 17, probably.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you
First edition, baby.
go. The
That's
pages
what's up.
didn't fall out yet. Amazing.
I
No,
got all my pages.
it kept it.
Yeah.
Got
Yeah,
all
the
my
color
pages.
section fell out in some of those first printings. It slid right up. Glue didn't work.
Yeah.
Mm,
That's the Bible right here. You can't disgrace it.
no, you sure
Hash
can.
Bible.
It's awesome. Oh yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, well, Rob, you wrote the Bible, you did a lot, but you validated our industry in a way that I don't think anyone else has. And I've seen that so many times, and it can't be understated um, how many times you're cited in people's books and research and on the research side, but on our side, on the community side, and on the stoner and the smoker side, you really did create this kind of higher echelon of cannabis enthusiasts that we all kind of followed. And in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, there wasn't a person to model after for a lot of people. You were just a stoner or a grower. And I'll just part with this because I remember we were on this call and we were talking to the import office for New Zealand, right? And the quarantine importation office, right? And we're trying to figure out what guidelines they used for importing cannabis and what their phytosanitary certification requirements. And they didn't even know who you were on the call, but then they cited cannabis, they cited Hemp, Pest and Disease as the book that they use, right? And they said, where do you get this list of known viroids and blah, blah, blah. And at that moment, I realized it's like, you've not only, you transitioned us all through it, but now on the other side, the straight side, the new side, they've used your body of work and publications as validation for what this plant is. And just for that, much respect, man.
Right on. Right on. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said before, you showed me that we could use science to chase down this plant and learn about it. And I know that's not something unique that you gave me. Your books, gave that perspective to a lot of people. So I think the trickle down from your work is quite deep.
Dude, one of the first things you ever said to me, if it don't bubble, it ain't worth the trouble, was literally how Dave Watson reached out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Someone
I
says
thank
here
you
in the
for all
chat,
sorts of
Rob.
things.
Someone says, thank you for not going into berries.
Interesting. That's interesting. Who was that? Who said that?
Browsing to learn. Browsing to learn is who said that.
Wow, it's interesting. When I got out of university in Santa Cruz, I looked for work. I did work in the agricultural industry for a while. I worked in a houseplant nursery. And when I was on the job search, I looked at Rod McClellan Orchids, some of the companies that have done pretty well since. And the only real solid offer I got was from Driscoll's Strawberries. And Driscoll's now is known for strawberries, of course, still, but mostly bushberries I get into. And I turned this job down because it was going to be a work with Ma and Pa Driscoll kind of thing. It was a little going to be too close. It was going to be like being part of the family. And yeah, I mean, I might be doing very well these days had I done such a thing, but I wouldn't have had any time to work with cannabis, that's for sure. So I didn't do that, but they went on to be monsters. They're not just Watsonville growers anymore. I see Driscoll berries in every grocery store I ever go into, even in Asia.
10 billion plantlets annually, Rob, from their tissue culture plant. 10 billion with a B.
Unfucking believable. And that started with a company that just figured out how to harden off strawberries and keep them through the year and then put them out in the fields. That was basically their starting thing ages ago. Unreal.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, I didn't go into berries, thank God. Had a temptation though.
We might have psychoactive berries by this point in time.
Whoa. Yeah. Sure like eating berries, but yeah.
Yeah, if it had been blueberries, it might have been different, Rob, I'd say. If they'd been big in blueberries, then you might have got you.
Cannabinoids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, the best blueberries I ever ate, I think, were in Santa Cruz, grown by weed growers. So,
right.
Well, that watermelon was the best watermelon. So,
yeah, yeah.
Maybe the cannabis plant has a symbiotic root relationship with sweeter fruit.
Maybe just a good drip system.
It might be that too. Enough water and fertilizer.
There you go.
So Rob's message to the audience is pay attention to the science. Let the science teach you the truth.
Yeah, ask questions and look to science for the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
and reproducible results, I think, is what you said earlier.
Yeah, that's what science gives you, something you can believe in. And scientists are humans, and science evolves just like everything else. So scientists change their minds. Just that's allowed. That's part of the game. I've certainly changed my mind over the years, but it's part of the progress. So yeah, I think looking to science for answers is a good thing. It's just a good start. About anything in life. But yeah.
And they can see and find the new book on Amazon, the new edition. I'm guessing third edition.
Yeah,
this is with the La Paz cover.
Yeah, Le Police sponsored cover. Yeah. And that's it's just a facsimile edition. There's nothing added. There's nothing special. It's just so people don't have to fight over them on eBay.
Yeah, it makes it available. That's enough, right? Obviously, people want to have access to the book, and got hard copies available.
It's been out for a while. I think so far there's been 11 copies sold or something.
We're going to change that.
Yeah, now people know about it. But yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Well, we'll let people know for sure that this is available, and really want to thank you for spending so much time with us today, Rob. 4 hours, super stoked, from a beautiful farm in Holland. It looks great behind you. It's been just picturesque the whole time. And thanks to Mojave and Fletch and Ryan for coming in and organizing this panel with Rob. It's a little different than how we normally do Hash Church, but how we normally do Hash Church is very much like a zing, zoom, zang. And Rob was kind of like, hey, let's just focus it a little bit more instead of all the left field stuff. And I was in full agreement. I think it was a great show. You laid out some really good information, Rob, with some good citations, books, and whatnot that I was, quickly able to share. Gittich Ranch, Pie Shop, Deli Side. Look at that. There's the boys right there.
It's a recent
classic.
No, thank you guys too. I mean, you came up with good questions. People from the audience too, and thank you for your time and effort. And I'll try to weigh in more on some of your future shows. I'd love
Yeah,
to
you're always welcome for
uh,
sure.
get on this next go around. Sounds good.
Absolutely.
All right,
Well,
you
thanks,
guys.
Rob. Much
Excellent.
Much
love,
love,
brother.
Rob.
Peace and love. Super good. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks to our sponsors, Puffco and Bubble Bags and the Press Club. Thanks for everyone for watching. And thank you guys, really. Ryan, Mojave, Fletch, thank you for
It was nice to be
making this
part of it.
a great episode, dude.
Yeah,
What
man.
a great episode, dude. Rob, we could do 10 parts of it. I know. It opened me up to, I'm going to watch this episode and I'm going to realize what we missed. I'm going to make notes on all the things we missed that I still want him to talk about because, yeah, it's important to get that information out there to the world. All right, everybody. We'll see you next Sunday. Have a great week. Peace out. Oh, as always, may the full melt bubble bless your bowl sooner than later.